Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Bat Cave. I think it's Thursday, July 27th, 2023. And I actually recorded a video that I wanted to talk about the whole Christ in the Tabernacle, Christ putting on our flesh, which I am going to talk about some more, and I might pop that video later. And then I've been working on the Catholic side of the equation for my series on Christendom, so you guys understand that there were basically the roots of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, which are just really two forms of Gnosticism, two forms of mystery cult that compete with each other. Those really emerged right off the bat, and they're basically two branches that descend from Ignatius of Antioch. You have the one side is going to be your philosopher theologians, which form the academy, and then your other side is going to be the priesthood. Okay, and that's going to be essentially those who look at themselves as kind of a priestly senate. So think of it like this: they're not getting into straight up papalism yet, because they're not so audacious as to say I'm the Christ on earth. That's crazy to them at this point. But what they see themselves as like a galactic senate. Okay, so these guys see themselves as basically the heirs of the apostles. Their church is established by the apostles. They were there first, and there's going to be an apostolic succession, and they are the priesthood, and God is establishing these fiefdoms, basically. So Christ is the king, and they would be like the lords of the kingdom. And so they'd be over their little governates that they call episcopates. Okay, and so episcopates and episcopal is just another word for bishop. Episcopate is basically what they call the bishopric, which is essentially, think of it like a lord in his gubernatorial region in a kingdom. Okay, that's how they see the world now. So they are already starting to form the theology of kingdom now, dominionism, right off the bat. And this starts with Ignatius. This is 10 years after John the Apostle dies. Okay, on the other side of the equation, and then this is going to start with Justin Martyr and Theophilus of Antioch 50 years later, really. These guys are going to start merging philosophy into Christianity, and they're going to form the first Christian academy at Alexandria. And both of these, Antioch and Alexandria, are going to influence Rome. Because remember, Rome is not the heartland of Christianity. Okay, it is kind of the remote fringes. It's the furthest west, and it's younger. The Roman Church is actually younger than the Alexandria. I mean, there are Roman Christians from the beginning, because the Romans were some of the people who were there at Pentecost. So you have the gospel going back to Rome early on. But in terms of a formal church with elders, it's one of the last in the New Testament. So you have, before Rome was established, you have Alexandria established by Mark and Barnabas. You have obviously Antioch that's established by the apostles, and those are established by the people who flee after the persecution of Paul. You have Paul establishing the Galatian churches. The Ephesian churches is really Paul and Apollos is establishing that. And then the Corinthian church, Paul establishes, and then Apollos waters. So they're going back and forth between the two. And that's why Paul's going to say one plants, one waters, because him and Apollos are basically, Apollos is going from John the Baptist ministry and spreading that Jesus is the Messiah in Ephesus. And then Paul is spreading the gospel after that. And Priscilla and Aquila are helping him. And then Apollos is going to go over to Corinth, and he's going to educate them in the messianic proofs, essentially. So all these are established, and then of course when Paul gets sent to Rome in prison, that is the first apostolic witness you have in Rome, and that is the first time elders are going to be established. And so he's going to show up, and then later Peter, so him and Luke are there, and then Peter and Timothy and Mark are going to come, and they're going to establish the first elders in Rome. They're all going to die within like a year or so of establishing those elders, and then John's going to remain in Ephesus for a good 30 to 35 years after that. Okay, he's going to die in the early beginnings of the second century as an old man, and immediately after he dies, you're going to have Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp basically being, you really have those two, and then Clement. Okay. So Clement, I don't know when he dies. I think he might have died before Theophilus wrote his letters, but Clement is basically mentioned by Paul in Romans, and then you have Ignatius, who is basically ordained by and discipled by John, and he is going to be in power in Antioch alone for about 30 years, which is not healthy. You should not be a lone bishop and having that much power of a church for that long. That's just a recipe for a bad church and somebody getting power mad. Okay, and then Polycarp is going to be a bishop who still believes in elders. Okay, so he is going to see bishops and elders as synonymous, just like the apostles did, where Ignatius sees bishops and elders as like bishops being like the high priest and elders being like the priests. And he's going to say that very clearly in his letters. Again, these are two different schools of thought. If you go to seminary, they're going to tell you that it was always like that, and that's not true. Okay, the idea of the bishop and an elder being distinct is not true. You did have a bishop that might be like the figurehead of the church in terms of somebody who might go and travel to other churches if there's going to be a regional, dealing with a heresy or church discipline issues that are transcending because a heresy is breaking out in a region. So you might have a representative for that, and that typically is going to be that bishop, that senior pastor, if you will. But the idea of the office being a higher office than the other offices is not true. You actually always have, it's kind of like an understudy to this bishop, and you're going to see this in the lists of bishops in Jerusalem and Rome, where there's clearly always a backup bishop ready to go because people are getting martyred. So they don't just have some guy just unprepared for somebody else to take over. And so you're supposed to have several bishops underneath them, or elders or bishops interchangeably, and then that lead bishop, if he dies, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to go after that head of the church and martyr him if persecution's happening because they're trying to destroy the leadership. The idea is the person underneath him immediately is prepared to take over. And this is going to take place in Jerusalem. It's going to take place in Rome. It's going to take place in all the churches except for Antioch, where this guy, Ignatius of Antioch, basically lets himself become the sole bishop and then starts teaching this doctrine immediately after John dies of basically the bishop being the high priest and the other elders like the subordinate priests who attend to him. Okay? Now, he's crazy. His ideas are demonic, and he is going to say that there's additional mysteries that God's revealed to him about hierarchies of angels, about the virginity of Mary, about the body of Christ and crucifixion, and about there's one other thing, and I can't remember what it was, but there's like four mysteries that he says he knows about, but he is not. He's telling the people he's writing to that he's not going to give it to them yet until they submit to the doctrine of him believing everybody circling around the bishop. And what he's basically saying is he is setting up bishops as lords, and the idea is you cannot so much as get married without the bishop's blessing. That's what it is, and this is what today we would call heavy shepherding. This would be like cult-like stuff, but this is what he is teaching that the whole church should get into. Okay. And he's basically saying this is how we defend against heretics, is by basically everybody just being loyal to the bishops. And then the idea is well, the bishops are loyal to each other because the bishops were ordained by the apostles, and so if the people are loyal to the bishops, the church stays united. Well, that's a good theory, but that's just kicking the Holy Spirit out, and that's just making it all about politics at that point. And so what you end up having is Ignatius teach this doctrine, and he writes 7 letters that are going to circulate. And you're going to have some of these letters that are going to have stuff chopped out of them, and then you're going to have other letters that are going to have stuff added to them, and then you're going to have fake letters all attributed to him, because he is obviously very influential. This guy would have been around at the destruction of Jerusalem, and in about 110 to 115 AD is when he gets martyred. And his martyrdom is famous. They actually write a story about it, and they embellish the facts and make it sound like all this supernatural stuff happened. And then what they also do, his name is Theophorus. Okay, so he calls himself Theophorus, which means the God bearer. Okay, so just so you know, this is the same title that they give to Mary in the whole Council of Ephesus, where Mary becomes the God bearer for bearing Jesus in her womb. Okay. He calls himself the God bearer because he is referencing the Holy Spirit being in him. But the title God bearer can also be translated to be carried by God. And the myth starts up that when the little child is picked up by Jesus and he says, "These are the ones who enter into the kingdom of heaven," the myth starts up that was him when he was a little kid. And it's not true. It's just, in the Catholic Church, what you have people doing is starting up myths and legends and attaching Bible stories and Bible characters to other people, and to try to make their local town or their local village famous because that guy maybe planted a church there or he came from there, and they're trying to make essentially their hometown heroes to be larger than life. Okay, so this is bad sauce, but he's going to do this, and then he's going to die, and then for the next about 50 years, you're going to have Polycarp as the last remaining bishop who personally knew the apostles. And so Polycarp gets really famous, okay? Well, Polycarp is basically going to, he's a humble bishop. Like, he is not trying to lord over anybody. He's not trying to add additional doctrine. In fact, he doesn't write a whole lot. He only writes one letter that we know of, and his letter is like a soft rebuttal to Ignatius. Now remember, when Ignatius dies, it's 50 years earlier, so Ignatius is probably like in his 80s, where Polycarp at this time is like in his maybe 30s, okay? So being this much older man who's going to die, Polycarp's not going to call him out and be like, "Hey, that guy's teaching a bunch of false teaching." He knows he's picked by the apostles, and the false teaching, he's more hinting at than teaching, with the exception of his bishop elders distinction. Well, Polycarp is going to write a letter at the same time, and he is going to remind you of the two offices of elders and bishops, and he's going to write, not on his sole authority, but he's going to say Polycarp with the bishops together, or with the elders together with him at Smyrna. Okay, and so he's writing in an apostolic way according to the ordained office, which is like saying, we as a church are writing to you, not me as a bishop, not me as somebody who's this elevated person. And he's going to warn them against the mixture of philosophy in the church on the one hand. He's writing this to the Philippians, okay? And the reason is because Ignatius has he's written a bunch of letters to the people who are along the route that he's going to travel to Rome. And so these letters are going to go to places like Smyrna, to Polycarp personally, to the Thralians. There's like 7 of them. The Magnesians, and then the Romans is going to be one, and then the Philadelphians is going to be one. Well, on his route, he passes through the Philippians, and he's probably teaching some of these quote-unquote mysteries to the Philippians. We don't have that in writing, but it looks like he's teaching that to them. But after he passes through, the Philippians write to Polycarp, and they ask for those letters that were circulated around them, because they want to keep them as kind of like a deuterocanon, okay? Now, they never bothered to close the canon officially after John died, and the reason they didn't is because you had persecution breaking out immediately. So as long as John's alive, the canon's not closed, because John could write something later, and he's an apostle, and so the canon's not closed. And so once John dies, they're already in the Trajan persecutions, and they literally have a gap of between maybe 1 to 3 years between John dying and the Trajan persecution starting. And what should have happened when John died, this should have been something really obvious. Polycarp should have written to Ignatius and say, "Hey, John's dead. He's the last apostle. He's dead." Now, you probably have guys like Aristion and John of the 70 elders who were after him, and they should have been involved with that too. These guys should have all gotten together and said, "Hey, John's dead. Let's close this canon of Scripture." But they didn't do that. I don't know why they didn't do that, okay? And so what you end up having is letters like Polycarp's letters, Ignatius' letter. You have Clement's letter, which mentions the phoenix. It quotes a Gnostic gospel. And then you have this shepherd of Hermas, which start to get circulated around the church as with the canon, basically, with the apostolic writings. And the reason is because Polycarp is obviously known to be, John's disciple. Ignatius is known to be handpicked by John. Clement is known to be picked by Peter and Paul. He's going to be like the 3rd leading bishop of Rome. And then you have Hermas, which people assume is the Hermas that's mentioned in Scripture, and he's not. He's actually, the Muratorian fragment actually says that he was the brother of Pope Pius, which is the bishop of Rome. This is like a 4th century document. So by this time, all the archbishops, if you will, are calling themselves popes. Okay, And so Pope Pius basically has a brother named Hermas who writes this letter, and this letter is like a combination of like a vision he's claiming to have or a dream or a vision he's have, plus basically a bunch of exhortations which are laced in with his vision. And so what it looks like is, maybe there was a genuine vision here, maybe the whole thing was demonically inspired, or maybe it's a guy just being creative and writing in this way. But what you have is essentially a bunch of stuff that doesn't line up with Scripture. You have a bunch of idiomatic and symbolic stuff that doesn't line up with Scripture. You have a lot of legalism, and then you have a lot of basically this guy getting rebuked by this angel who shows up looking like a woman he used to have a crush on. Now he's married, and he's got kids, and basically this woman who looks like a woman he used to have a crush on is supposedly an angel representing the church, telling him to essentially control his wife and kids. And in that context, then this other angel goes on to say that angel was a church, shows up as a beautiful woman, and then she shows up as an old woman, and he says that she represents the church, and that there's all these exhortations, and a lot of these things are going to be mixed with common sense and Christian truth, and then some of it is just going to be weird. But you actually have the angel say that this is the ironic thing, is the angel tells him that a false prophet is going to mix a lot of truth in with the false prophecy, and the way that you can tell if they're a false prophet is if they take money or whatever for their prophecies or whatever. If they're wealthy, then they're a false prophet, he's going to say, which is Barnabas was wealthy and he was a true apostle. So, they're going to create these stipulations that are basically rules for designating false prophets, rather than those rules being strictly what the Bible says, which is about signs coming to pass and whether or not they're leading you to other gods and whether or not they're going to teach according to the apostolic teaching. So they're going to kind of mix fruits of the Spirit in with signs having to do with money and wealth and materialism and stuff like that. And this is going to come across as pretty wise. Your average Christian is going to look at this and go, this is definitely not apostolic, this is definitely not inspired by the Holy Spirit. But you're going to look at it and go, well, there's enough stuff that aligns with Christian truth, and he is Hermas. They're assuming he's one of the people who was picked by the apostles. So we're gonna circulate that as part of this kind of deuterocanon. Well, it eventually comes out that these people are like, yeah, that's not the Hermas of the Bible. This guy was like probably 40 years after the last apostle died, at least. So he's not with the apostolic writings, but we'll circulate in the churches anyway because it's already popular. And let's just make sure people know this is not one of the prophets, and this is not an apostolic writing. But this is the guy when this woman shows up who looks like somebody, again, this woman he used to have a crush on when he was a boy. And then this other angel shows up and he says, do you know who that woman was? He says, is it the Sibyl? Well, the Sibyl is the Sibylline oracle. And if you know your Greek history, you have the Oracle of Delphi, you have all these different oracles that show up, and there's like 5 of them. And their writings are basically considered prophecy by the Greeks and the Romans, and they're actually adhered to by the Roman kings. And then they get burned, and then they get recollected by basically getting other people's copies, and then they get burned again, and then they get recollected again. And then somewhere in the Middle Ages you have versions of them pop up, which is what you can find online, the Sibylline oracles, and you're going to have stuff that seems exactly like the Bible in them. Well, the reason is because by that time you have Christians actually embellishing on these things, just like you had Christians writing stuff into Josephus and trying to make it sound way more in line with the Bible than it does. There's a lot of stuff in Josephus that corroborates stuff in the Bible, and then there's stuff that later medieval Christians embellished to make it look like it was exactly what the Bible said, okay? And these guys are going to do this with the Bible, they're going to do this with other writings, and one of the people they're going to do this with is Plato in a big way, and they're going to make it sound like Plato, like Clement's going to flat out tell you that Plato is basically commentating on Moses. And this is, the Neoplatonists are going to do this. And the real students of Plato are going to be like, this is crazy talk. He is not talking about Moses. I think there are things that he has heard that are probably influenced by Moses, but he certainly has no direct knowledge of Moses. There's no evidence of this in Plato's writings. But anyways, because Hermes is being circulated, and because Hermes first assumes that this angel appearing to him in the vision is a Sibyl, that leads Christians to start up with the idea that the Sibylline oracles are divinely inspired. And the first person you're going to hear say that is Justin Martyr, okay? And you're going to have Justin Martyr say that. I don't think Irenaeus says it. I know Justin Martyr does, but you're going to have Tatian of Antioch, or Tatian the Assyrian, who was converted by Justin Martyr. He's going to say it. You're going to have Theophilus of Antioch. I believe he says it. I could be mistaken. But he is going to be the bishop of Antioch, but he's obviously influenced by Justin Martyr and Tatian the Syrian. He is going to be 3 bishops removed from Ignatius of Antioch. And then you're also going to have this guy, Anathegoras, say it. Now, these guys are saying it in writings that are going out to the pagans. And the reason is because they do know that these Sibylline oracles corroborate the story of Noah's flood, and they corroborate the story of the Tower of Babel. Okay? That is legit. But what they don't know is where it came from. And so what we're going to end up having is these people claiming that the Sibylline oracles are prophets, but they don't know where this stuff came from. And if you do your research, and this is what I'm going to do for my Danite book, the Sibylline oracles started popping up after the destruction of Jerusalem's temple. And right after the destruction of Jerusalem's temple and the Jews going into captivity, what you have is the Jewish people seem like they're disappearing. And the Danites, who have had a counterfeit priesthood all along since the book of Judges, and have been sailing with the Greeks and the Phoenicians, so they're in Greece, they're in Carthage, they're in Phoenicia, they're in Egypt, and they're probably beyond that. They're probably in Tarshish. There's studies I found where it looks like they helped monopolize the trade of tin, which you need to make bronze. Copper is largely going to come from Cyprus. Tin's going to largely come from England. And if you monopolize the trade of tin and making of bronze, you have a control over a lot of your metal production, okay? Which is going to be necessary, especially for ornamental things and ceremonial things, okay? Like bronze is shiny, and you use it to make instruments. You use it to make various fittings. Obviously, it's less expensive than gold, but it's more durable. It's in terms of just making hard stuff out of it. And then iron is going to be more common, but it's not as pretty, okay? And so what you're going to have is you're going to have the Danites be involved with spreading around. We find in Greece, you find the Danites spreading basically new religious cults where people are sacrificing lambs to have their sins forgiven. And you're going to find Plato talk about this, okay? And he bases this on these guys called Mucius and Orpheus, which I believe these guys, what I'm reading, this is from Clement and Plato and all these ancient guys. So you're looking at 500 to 600 BC as the earliest starting point of the Greek stuff, to Clement, which is like 2nd century AD. So you're looking at a 700-year period. And the accumulated stories seem to say that all this stuff came from Phoenicia, which is where the Danites mixed in. And then these stories about Orpheus, there wasn't a one guy called Orpheus. There was a bunch of songs attributed to this guy named Orpheus, which is the root of the term orphan. And this guy Orpheus was supposedly this guy who was trained by Mucius, and Mucius is supposedly the sons of the Muses, or son of the Muses. So he's supposed to be like half god or whatever. And he basically that's where the word music comes from. So the word music comes from Muses and this guy Musaeus, who I believe is Moses. And Musaeus is basically this guy who comes up with this idea of sacrificing sheep to have your sins forgiven. This is in Plato's Republic, okay? And this guy, Musaeus and Orpheus, they both believe this, okay? And Orpheus is supposedly trained by Musaeus, and Musaeus commits things having to do with song to basically communicate and help people remember religious things, which you have the first psalm in the book of Psalms is the Song of Moses. It's actually Psalm 90. The book of Psalms is by David, but the Song of Moses is obviously much older. You also have the Song of Moses in In Deuteronomy 32, you have the Song of Miriam, his sister, which is going to be after they come out of Egypt. And so you see the early Israelites using song as a way to remember various things. And that's why you have the book of Psalms. Okay, that's where hymns come from. Okay, well, the Greeks are criticizing this because they're basically saying you're using songs as a way to get people to remember superstitious things that aren't rational. That's what the Socratics and people after that are saying in their day, and that's why Plato is commentating on Musaeus and Orpheus. Well, Orpheus pops up after, this is after, according to Clement, and this is me putting this together. This is not Clement or anyone else putting this together. Clement is basically saying that according to, he's in Alexandria, which is where the largest library of all the known knowledge in the world is, and he is just quoting story after story after story after story after story of people who are trying to account the age of the earth and how long it was from Adam until the present. And they're mixing Roman history, Greek history, Phoenician history, Egyptian history, Babylonian history, and then the Bible. Okay, and that's where they're trying to come up with all this stuff. And he comes up with all these different numbers of how old the Earth is, and there's a difference of literally a few thousand years, but they're all in that ballpark of 5,000 years, basically. I've got 4,200 about. And basically, he is talking about how Menelaus, who is the guy who destroyed Troy, visits Phoenicia, and he visits King Hiram, who's the same King Hiram who knows David and Solomon. Okay, and he also talks about Herodotus visiting Phoenicia, and this is going to be about 500 years later, and talking about the Pillars of Hercules being a monument in Phoenicia dedicated to Hercules, who's this guy who killed a lion, who went on all these adventures. Among the, he actually ruled over the Argives, which if you ever heard of Jason and the Argonauts, that's the Argives. And basically the Argives are a people on the north of the Peloponnese, and the Peloponnese is where the Spartans are. Well, the theory I'm putting together is that Samson has 20 years between his story about his wife getting killed with the Philistines and him burning all the fields with the foxes. And then there's a story after that where he comes to Ashkelon, which is near the coast of Philistia, and he sleeps with a prostitute, and then he carries off the gates to Hebron. And then there's the story of Delilah, which is basically at the end of his life. It's like, I think he has like 3 years where he's grinding grain blind, and then he dies. Okay, well, the story is that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. So what happened to all the other history of the stuff that happened? And what I think happened is Samson was probably out and about. He's traveling around. Obviously, he's in Ashkelon. If you get a map of where he's gone, if you get a map of everywhere Samson has gone, this is going to be the coast of Israel. Okay, in this region, if you look at the mountainous region up here, that's where the Judahites are. And then if you look in the lowlands, that's where the Danites are, okay? And so this region right here is meant to be the Danites region, but the Philistines dominate it, and the Philistines are over them. And so this little town of Timnah here, first of all, you have Samson being born up in this region, okay? And then it talks about how he's going back and forth between these two camps here, and these are two camps of the Judahites. But Samson clearly roams around, okay? And so he goes down to Timnah, and he wants a Philistine wife. So here's what we know about Samson. And again, my theory when this comes out in the Trail of the Serpent book, okay, is going to be largely conjecture. I'm not going to be able to prove this hard because the Danites were apparently, if the Danites are the Tuatha De Danann, where the Druids come from, they were known for never writing anything down, okay? They memorized a lot of stuff, and then they had stuff that was kept in symbols and secret handshakes and stuff like that, okay? That's what the Druids were known for. And so, like, the Druids were known from the time of Julius Caesar all the way through the Middle Ages, but nobody knew anything that they wrote down, that they believed concretely, because they didn't write anything down, okay? Well, that's the Danites, I think. And what I think here is this. So Samson goes to Timnah, he gets a Philistine bride, and then he does this whole thing with a riddle, and then his bride and her father end up getting burned alive because Samson goes down to, from there he goes down to Ashkelon, which is down here. or it's either Ashkelon or Gaza. I think he goes to Gaza. He goes down here to the valley and kills 30 people to go get the robes there. So Samson's wandering about. And then he goes down to Ashkelon to sleep with a prostitute, and that's where he gets a gate and carries that gate all the way up to the hills of Hebron. Okay, so Samson is a beast, and he apparently could carry this gate all the way up to here. Okay, this is like 30 miles. Okay, he doesn't just rip off the gates of the city. He rips off the gate of the city and he carries it all the way up to the freaking mountains. That's like, I mean, this right here is about the size of New Jersey, okay? And so imagine this guy going across half the breadth of New Jersey carrying a city gate in his back, okay? He's a beast. Anyways, he just goes down there to bang a hooker. Like, and I don't think he just went down there to bang a hooker. I don't think he's just like, I'm just going to venture, 100 miles away from my home just to go, find a hooker. I don't think he's doing that. I think Samson is an adventurer. And I think Samson, one is he's mixing with the Philistines. He's marrying in with the Philistines. And the Philistines are a seafaring people, and so are the Danites, okay? And what you have going on during this period is you have these, you got to remember, like, the Philistines and the Judahites and the Danites are like frenemies, okay? They're not like full on, like, we're going to try to conquer you. They literally would have contests where, like, let's have your toughest guy fight our toughest guy, and whoever loses pays tribute to the other person, okay? Now think about this. This is what the Philistines are doing. Do you guys remember a famous movie where you see that exact thing happen? How about the movie Troy, where Brad Pitt's character goes and fights this big giant, okay? Does that seem exactly like David fighting Goliath? The answer is yes. Why? Where do you think they got this practice from? The Philistines were doing it, okay? The Philistines were doing this in the time of David. And you got to remember, the Greeks get their alphabet from the Phoenicians, and they don't write anything down until after the Solomon Temple period, okay? So everything they're saying is like, ooh, we have this guy Achilles. Do you know where Achilles is? Achilles is one of the Argives, okay? And then he's gonna kill this giant, right? Like, this is the story of him, right? He's this guy who he fights this giant, okay? Where do you think they're getting these stories from? Well, so you have, what happens is you have Samson, who I think becomes a traveler, and you have the sea peoples at this time who are like Philistines, Asherites, and just so you know, like Clement talks about these ancient people who were called gods among the Phoenicians, and they were called the happy, okay? Do you know what Asher's name means? It means happy, okay? They were called the happy people, and they were considered gods, okay? So you think about, these are the Asherites, okay? They're and they would have been on the coast. You would have had Dan here, and you would have Asher here, and the Asherites are literally the tribe whose territorial allotment surrounds the city of Tyre. So you literally have the sea peoples who are invading Egypt called the Pelestim. There's your Philistines. The Denyen, there's your Danites. One of them are called the Ashakar, which that's Asher. One is called Chijeker, which I think is Tyre. And then one is called Shkelon or something like that, which I think is Ashkelon. Okay, so this is where the sea peoples are coming from. Now, Clement says the Phoenicians worship these people called the happy people, or consider them gods. Okay, and you know, like how the you have Asherah poles appearing in the Bible. Think about it. Asher means happy. Asherah poles are literally supposed to be female goddesses that are the happy people. Okay? This stuff about Asherah poles being Nimrod's dong and all this stuff, I've probably said this myself if you watch old enough videos of mine. I'm finding out all this Nimrod and Semiramis stuff is all false. It's all invented by this guy Thomas Orosius, who's a Presbyterian minister in the 1800s. It's all conjecture based on symbols. None of it is based on historical research. Okay, the only book I've researched the book myself. The only book he cites is a book by this guy named Paulus Orosius, who is a disciple of Augustine in Britain, who makes the conjecture that Semiramis and Ninus, which is of the Assyrian era, is Nimrod and his consort, and that's where Ish. And then this guy takes that forward and says Semiramis is Isis and Ishtar and Easter and all this other stuff, and it is just a bunch of really bad etymology, really bad linguistics, and attaching symbols to try to prove that the Roman Catholic Church is the Mystery Babylon cult. There's definitely, the Roman Catholic Church is definitely the mystery cult, but the idea that it came from Babylon in this myth that you'll hear Chuck Missler say, that the Babylonian priesthood went to Pergamos, where Satan's throne is. I have researched and dug everywhere, and there is nothing whatsoever that substantiates that myth. That came from that came from Bishop Hislop's The Two Babylons, and he just made it up. Okay, but what you do have in the Bible is you have the people of Israel setting up these Asherim. Okay. So the Asherah poles were a Canaanite thing that is referenced in the Hebrew Bible, and this is apparently something that the Philistines are doing prior to the Judahites coming in. Okay, the Canaanites are doing this. Okay, and so it's mentioned first in Deuteronomy, and they are very much into sex cults. Okay, they're very much into fertility gods and sex cults. And then they now get surrounded by these people called Asher. Okay, so remember, the languages are linguistically similar. Okay, and so you have Asher and you have Asherim. Okay, so Asherim would be how a Semitic person would say they would say Asherim instead of Asherites. Okay, we see Asherites in our English transliteration of the Bible, but those words, the words like the parts "ite" is not actually in the language. Okay, it might just say Asher, and different people are going to call them Asherim, and that's how you pluralize it. It could be I am or S or ites or whatever. So what you do is you have a conflation with the people of Asher who surround Tyre. This is the Sidonians, okay, and with the Asherah poles, which is basically some form of goddess worship. Okay, the Asherah poles figure out what poles are. Okay, and basically this travels to the Greeks, and the Greeks think that the Phoenicians have some kind of gods among them who are the happy people. They're called the happy people because Asher means happy. Okay, so anyways, back to Samson. Samson, basically, it looks like I think he personally was part of these sea peoples that are raiding the Egyptians, and here's why. The Danites and pretty much all the Israelites know that Egypt's weak because all their firstborn are killed, and they're economically devastated. They're not able to project power. Pharaoh's army was drowned in the Egyptian sea, okay? They're in a weakened state, and they don't build up for a while. And what you have is in the 100 to 200 years after the Jews leave Egypt, you have nonstop raids from these sea peoples who are going to be, remember, this is their territorial allotment, but they don't control it all, because if you read the book of Judges, they settled in with these people, and they let the Philistines kind of just stay there. They let a lot of the Canaanites stay here in these various places, and then they let the Sidonians definitely stay here, okay? And then the Danites are going to move up here to the north of Asher in Naphtali, and they're going to found Dan, which is going to be the furthest north city of Israel, at least on this side of the Jordan. It looks like Manasseh goes up a little higher, possibly. And that's where you get the phrase that pops up in Judges for the first time, from Dan to Beersheba. Okay, they would say all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and where's Beersheba? So Beersheba would have been like the southernmost major city in Israel, and Dan is going to be the northernmost. Now, they technically control the territory all the way down to the Red Sea. That's part of their original allotment. But they don't really have any major cities there. They're not going to get into sailing and ports and stuff like that. Judah is not going to do that until the days of Solomon, okay? but the Danites and the Asherites are, because they're doing this on the Mediterranean coast. They're probably starting out fishing, and then merchants and stuff like this, and then the Philistines and the Sidonians are already sailing to Cyprus and Crete and mixing with the Aegean civilization, and then these sea people decide to start pirate raiding Egypt, okay? And what happens, this is my theory, is that the Minoan civilization of Crete, basically, which is really projecting, kind of trade and naval power in the Aegean Sea at that time. The Minoan civilization basically is originally, I think, is going to be Philistines, who came from Egypt. And they basically dominated the pre-Greeks that are there already. And I think, I know the Kittim were in Cyprus, and I think they dominate that too. And then Cyprus is going to be where bronze comes from. The Philistines are known for having iron weapons, and they're going to dominate these people. And then when Egypt falls, remember, the Philistines are an Egyptian tribe, they get weakened. And what looks like it happens is that's when Zeus, who is their king of Crete, rises up and basically overthrows he might be a descendant of these, but basically you'll find in their Minoan culture you're going to have brown-skinned men and white-skinned women, and the reason is because the Egyptians are dominating. Okay, so you're going to have these dark-skinned men who are going to be dominant, and then they're going to be taking the choicest white-skinned women because they're going to be recessive. Okay. And then the Philistines get kicked out, and that's where you hear about the remnant of Crete, the remnant of the Philistines coming from Captor. And Captor, I find out, is where the name Egypt comes from. Okay, so long story in the etymology, GYP and C is capped, and you're going to have G's and C's and K's transliterated all across languages, but capped is where Egypt comes from. And Egypt is basically Egyptus, which is the Coptics, okay? And basically it says the Philistines are the remnant that were drawn from Caphtor. That's in the Bible in Jeremiah, and it's in Amos. And turns out that they come from Crete, okay? And so they come from Crete, and then they come from Cyprus, okay? And so basically when the Egyptians lose their power, that's when you see Zeus, who is this Minoan civilization. It's going to start with the king Zeus, and Minos is either his father or his son. Is going to be where it's like King Mean or King something like that. That's where the Minoan civilization is going to come from, and then the Minoan civilization is going to fall, and it looks like that's because of the Sea Peoples. It looks like the Sea Peoples, who are led by Danites, okay? Remember, the Danites are like a 60 or 80,000 man strong army that comes into Israel, and then they conquer all their enemies in a generation. So you have a generation who is groomed for war. They're conquering all their enemies, and they're the second biggest army in Israel. And then they take to the seas and they leave, okay? And this is going to be in Deborah and Barak. She's going to mention how they stayed on their ships and they didn't come to help Israel in this battle that they have with Barak and Sisera, okay, where Jael sticks a peg through his head and kills him. So the Danites aren't helping. By this time, they're already skedaddling. By the end of the book of Joshua, they've already taken over Laish and named it Dan, and that story is also going to be with more detail in the book of Judges, because it's leading into the story of how everybody from Dan to Beersheba is gathered to go destroy the Benjamites because of the woman who gets raped to death. Okay, and there is significant evidence to say that the story of Samson is out of order. So we don't. The book of Judges is not necessarily a steady progression of who's all judging in order. The beginning of it certainly is. But you have different stuff that's going on in different regions of Israel. So some of this stuff is going to be concurrent, okay? Samson, basically the story of Samson goes on, and this could have been very early on in the period of the book of Judges, or it could have been later on. But when you get to the story of Samson onward, you're definitely dealing with a different kind of chronology, because what you have and my roommate just pointed this out to me too, because he studies Hebrew too. Dan means judge. So the book of Judges literally could be like the book of the Danites. The Danites could have been the ones who originally compiled the book of Judges. And I never really thought about that, but the Danites end up being prominent in it. And so what you have is the book of Judges really starts with the death of Joshua, and then it's going to go through a number of different people until you get to chapter 12. You're going to have Judges up through chapter 5 is going to cover a lot of different judges. There's like 12 of them all together, and like half of them are covered by chapter 5, okay? And then you're going to get to Deborah and Barak, and Deborah and Barak is the one who says, Gilead abode above Jordan. So Gilead are going to be the Manasseites on the other side of the Jordan River. In other words, they didn't come down into Israel, they stayed on the other side. And why did Dan remain in ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches, okay? So notice who he's saying. Zebulun and Naphtali were a people that jeopardized their lives unto death in the high place of the field. So this is really important when you understand what peoples are coming to help them. So Gilead is going to be over here. See, Ramoth Gilead, he's saying they don't help, okay? Asher remains on their seashore. They don't help. And the Danites remain in their ships. So remember, the Danites and the Asherites are some of the sea people right now, and they're busy. Their armies are busy raiding Egypt. They're raiding the Hittites, and they're raiding the Aegean. Okay, that's what they're doing at this time. And so their armies didn't come to help when Deborah and Barak were going to fight against. Who were they fighting against? So when they go to prosecute this battle against Sisera, who is, I believe, he's a Canaanite, that they fight in the valley of Megiddo. Zebulun and Naphtali help, okay? And you see where they are. So Zebulun and Naphtali are right here, and this is literally where the valley of Megiddo is, so that makes sense why they help. And then they say, Asher continued on the seashore, Dan remained in ships, Gilead abode above Jordan. Then he says, blessed above women shall be Jael, the Heber, the Kenite. The Kenites are actually descended from the Midianites that are family with Moses. And it looks like Deborah is from Ephraim. And it looks like Barak is at least from the region of Naphtali, okay? So what you have going on in the book of Judges is you have some of the people being oppressed by the Mesopotamians who are from over here. They try to oppress them for a little bit. And the Chaldeans are actually ruling Mesopotamia after the Ammonites take it over. And then you have some of the people from the Midianites who are attacking them. This is going to be Gideon and people like that. And then you have the Philistines that are oppressing them. And then you have these Canaanites, because remember they let the Canaanites live. You have the Canaanites oppressing them, and that's what Deborah and Barak are believing. So this is a regional war over here. Samson is a regional war over here. Gideon seems to have to do with... Who's Gideon from? Gideon seems to be a Manassite, so he's from one of these two parts, and they're going to be leading the fight against the Midianites. The Judahites, even though this is their allotment, they're mostly staying up here, it looks like. The Reubenites, which are down here, they didn't help with this war against the Canaanites, so those are one of the people they said they just stayed there with their flocks. And so what you have here is you basically have a bunch of regional conflicts. And so when you get to Samson, there's no real telling exactly when Samson took place. What we know is that it talks about Samson, and then it talks about the Danites who go and take Laish and call it Dan. And it talks about a woman in this story who has the same amount of silver as Delilah was given. And she's cursing the silver, and she has a son that makes an idol out of the silver. Okay, and that very well may be Samson's son. There's no telling if he loved a woman in the valley of such and such, the valley of Sorek, which is where this area right here, and he's sleeping with her, obviously. So he very well could have gotten her pregnant, okay? And that son who made that idol, which ultimately goes to the Danites, could be him. And it just talks about this woman who's like basically got a big pile of money, and she's living up in Ephraim, Judah. And then this Levite from Ephraim, Judah comes to her son, and he's a descendant of Moses, and they start a counterfeit priesthood in his house. And then the Danites take the idol, and then they take that Levite, and that priesthood ends up, and they actually know him, because like when he shows up, when the Danites show up in the book of Judges, this is really weird. So you have Samson in like chapter 13 through 16, and then you have chapter 17, you have Ephraim, or this guy of this Mount Ephraim who's Micah, and he says to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that was taken from thee. And remember, you have a bunch of Philistine lords go up to her and say, we're each going to give you 1,100 pieces of silver. And I don't know if that means 1,100 pieces of silver each, or all of us together we're all going to contribute and give you 1,100 pieces of silver. But that's a lot of money. Remember, in the days of the Romans, a day's wages is a piece of silver. So it's like 3 years' wages. It's basically like going to this woman and telling you, we're going to give you $300,000 to portray this guy or whatever, okay? It's a lot of money for a single woman to have. And apparently you have a single woman right after that with a son who's got 1,100 shekels of silver, okay? And she's cursing it, okay? And he makes an idol out of it. And then this other guy comes from Bethlehem, Judah, and this is Moses' grandson. And when the Danites are passing through to go take Dan, remember, they're traveling up from the region of Dan through Ephraim, and they're heading up to Dan, okay? They're in Mount Ephraim at this time. The Israelites are not a huge tribe at this time. Remember, this is Moses' grandson, okay? So this has got to be pretty early on after they come into the Promised Land, because Moses has kids 40 years before they get to the Promised Land. His son is getting circumcised on the way to Egypt 40 years before, which means his grandkids this has got to be pretty early on in them taking the Promised Land, because it's in Joshua, right after the allotment of land, which means it's really old. And then this story here has it placed after the story of Samson. And that's why I'm conjecturing, based on just something I just thought of and talked to my roommate about yesterday, is that Judges could literally mean Danites. And this could be basically the record of the Danites before they start leaving Israel. Like, that's their contribution to the Bible. Because you really have like the main tribes going into Israel are going to be the Levites, the Judahites, the Ephraimites, is where Joseph comes from, and then the Danites, which is where Samson comes from. Those are the main big armies, and those are the main leadership of Israel, okay? And so what you have is obviously the Judahites turn into the kingly writings. You have the Ephraimites are basically the writings of the kings. Samuel's not an Ephraimite, but you have the kings, Elijah and Elisha, which are hugely part of the books of Kings. That's coming from them. And then you have the Levites are obviously going to contribute the Chronicles and Ezra, Nehemiah, stuff like that. And then you're going to have this could be the Danite contribution to the Old Testament. Okay, is the books of Judges. Okay, Joshua's an Ephraimite. So that would have been part of their contribution. And then the Danites, like the book of Judges, remember, Dan means judge. So judges could literally mean Danites, okay? That could literally be the book's title. And it could be a book that's centered around the Danites. And so what you end up having is you have all these judges. And this is all before there's a king in Israel, okay? There's no king. And the story of the Danites that the early church fathers are going to have is that when Israel gets a king and then the kingdom splits in the next generation, the Danites don't really want any part of it anymore. They look at it as like, this is a mess, it's going to be a civil war, we don't want to take sides, we're out. Okay? And they're a seafaring, mercantile people at this time. Their last contribution to the Bible is really when a Danite, who is basically... his mom was married to a guy of Naphtali, and then she remarries a guy of Tyre after her husband dies, and her son is basically half Danite, half Naphthalite, but his father is of Tyre. And you have the Danites marrying in with the Sidonians, which that's where Tyre is populated by. I believe it's also people, remnants of Troy, but definitely Sidonians. And you have the Danites who are marrying in with the Sidonians, which was forbidden. None of the Canaanite tribes were supposed to marry in with them. Okay, they could marry in with Moabites, but they couldn't come into the assembly of the Lord. It was like for 4 generations or something like that. Or no, I think he said the Moabites can't come into the assembly of the Lord for 10 generations, like as a whole, which means 10 generations after the Moabites betrayed Israel, they could come into the assembly of the Lord. In other words, they could start marrying in with them at that time. Okay, but the Canaanites were supposed to be wiped out, and they weren't supposed to marry any of them, and the Danites are marrying in with them. Okay, so we have the Danites basically forsaking Moses. They have them with a grandson of Moses starting a counterfeit priesthood, which is right here in the book of Judges. Okay, and mind you, this seems to be the Danites' book, because you have from Joshua to Deborah and Barak, which account them not... or first you have Gideon, who basically his son kills his 70 sons and tries to take over all of Israel. And then you have a civil war after that between Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay? And then you have after that, you have them almost wipe out the Benjamites. And so this could literally be why the Danites are just like, yeah, we're done with this. Like, this just keeps turning into civil wars and fighting, we're done with this. And they just start sticking to their ships and their mercantile stuff. And then it leads up to chapter 13 where you introduce Samson. Mind you, the whole thing is 21 pages. And it leads up to, it seems to crescendo with Samson, because Samson is the last main judge it talks about. And then after that, it goes into, after Samson, it goes into this Micah, who very well could be Samson's son. It doesn't say that. All it just says is that his mother has 1,100 pieces of silver that she curses, and that he makes an idol out of it, and then he hires the grandson of Moses. So this has got to be pretty early on after they enter the Promised Land. And this grandson of Moses is going to be his priest. And then the Danites come along, and they say, when they're walking by the house, they hear the voice of the Levite. And it says, when they were by the house of Micah, it says, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. Okay? Now, I've studied this out with Jews who said that this Manasseh here is actually Moses. Okay? So this Jonathan, the son of Gershom, which is Moses' son, and this is Manasseh, but they alter the word Moses. It's just like a slight letter alteration to make it, change it to Manasseh, and they do that to not profane the name of Moses. Okay, but they know it's Moses. Okay, so this is Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and he's a young man. Okay, so he's a young man, but he's the son of Moses' son. And you got to remember, Moses' son is like 40 when they enter in the Promised Land. So this has got to be like right after they enter in the Promised Land, which means that the story of Samson could literally be right after they get into the Promised Land. And Samson could have this stuff going on. And the reason like the Judahites are all afraid of the Philistines is because if you read the first 2 chapters of the book of Judges, in the first chapter it talks about all the battles after Joshua, And it talks about how they fail to drive everyone out after that. So Joshua basically fights until he's an old man, and he defeats all the major armies and all the major kings in the land. And then he gives them their tribal allotments, and he's like, it's your job to clear these people out now, okay? And when he does, it talks about how Judah and Simeon go up, and they fight against the Canaanites to take their lot, and they drive out the Perizzites, and they kill 10,000 men of Bezek. And then it says, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So there's two tribes gone, okay? Then it talks about how the children of Judah went to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain in the south, in the valley, and they slew the Canaanites in Hebron, okay? So they slew this Shishai, Amahim, and Talmai, and I think they're giants. I think they're Nephilim. I could be wrong. And then it says they fought against Debir, and then it says then Caleb. Remember, Caleb is leading the Judites. Caleb is Joshua's friend, and he is basically the first of the judges after Joshua. Okay, and then he basically says, whoever takes Kiriath Jephthah, I'll give Achish my daughter to wife, and Othniel the son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother. I think it's actually like a grandson of Caleb's brother ends up taking her, and he basically gets like. He becomes a major aristocrat, if you will, in Judah on this basis. So this is Othniel. He's like a nephew, I think, of Caleb. Anyways, that's kind of it. And then it says, and Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Ashkelon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast thereof. Said so basically they're going after the Philistines right away, and the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. Okay, so essentially he's saying that they somehow took Gaza and Ashkelon and Ekron right along. Those are Philistine stronghold cities, and then they draw out the inhabitants of the mountain, but there are people with chariots of iron, which the Philistines had, in the valleys that they weren't able to take out. So apparently these Philistines make a comeback in the days of Samson, okay? And then it says the Benjamites did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. That's not going to get taken until David. And then the Canaanites were supposed to be driven out by Manasseh, but they end up leaving like 4 towns from there, and that's who's going to come and fight against them, and that Deborah and Barak are going to have to fight, and they're going to be ticked off because these people should have been gone. And then it says the Ephraimites didn't drive out the Canaanites. He said they put them to tribute instead of driving them out. And then Zebulun, like they're basically like kill these people until there's no more of them in the land, and they're either going to flee the land or they're going to die. Basically, that's what God told them to do, but they wouldn't do it. And then it says Asher didn't drive out the inhabitants of Acco or the inhabitants of Zidon or Alab or Azkib or Helvalah or Aphek or Rehob. Notice they don't mention Tyre. Okay. Now Tyre is mentioned in Joshua. And he says that the coast of Ramah turneth to the strong city Tyre, and the coast turneth to Hosah. Well, we know that they would put the modern name of a city where it was. I don't think Tyre gets his name until after the fall of Troy, and I think it's New Troy. What it is it's a coastal city off the coast of Sidon that's a merchant people that sail around. And I think Tyre, because the original founder of Troy and the Thracians is Tyrus, the son of Japheth, and I think that's where Tyre gets his name. And so the Jews would call, like in the book of Genesis, they would edit it, and they would change the city of Laish's name to Dan and say Abraham chased them all the way to Dan, okay? When it wasn't called Dan until we get to Joshua. Well, it's the same thing with Tyre. I don't think Tyre was called Tyre until the Trojan War, and the Trojans, basically the merchant class of Troy, resettled in Tyre. And then they mixed with the Danites and the Sidonians, and they refound Carthage. Others of them, of the remnants of Troy, found Rome. and or the Roman civilization, the Etruscan civilization, which Etruscan is probably like Trojan. It's probably a transliteration of Trojan, because what you have is when you get to the Gaelic language, which is, remember, they're going to be surrounded by Celts and Gauls for the way. In the Gaelic language, you have they put a vowel at the beginning of everything. So that's why my tribe, the Chippewa tribe, to the French call it the Ojibwa, because they put a vowel at the beginning of everything. Okay, so that's why they would have also Egyptus for Coptic. Okay, so Giptic or Coptic or Gipt, Kipt, Copt is going to translate to Copt, and then they're gonna put those vowels in front of it, and then it turns into Egypt. Okay, so Tyre basically pops up just on the map out of nowhere after the Trojan War. Okay, and the Spartans, led by King Menelaus, is the one who sacks Troy. Okay. And what Clement is saying is that the story of Europa the Bull and Zeus and all that is tied in with the story of Helen of Troy and all that. Okay, so there's multiple stories about people going to war over a beautiful woman that either gets raped or kidnapped or something like that. Okay, and I don't know where the origin story is of that, but what you have is, it could be the woman that gets raped to death in the Book of Judges. That could be the original, story of this great war that happens after a woman gets raped, basically. But what you have is you have the Spartans in the days of the Maccabees. They mention a letter from the original king of the Lacedaemons, which are the Spartans, that these people who are descended from Hercules and King Danaus they're saying that they're sons of Abraham. They're telling the Jews this, and the Jews pull this out in the book of Maccabees, saying, we have this old letter from your old king saying that we're one with you and you're sons of Abraham. Okay, well, the Lacedaemons are the center of the Aegean League. Okay, and remember, the Aegean civilization is going to pick up after the Minoan civilization collapses. And so what happens is you have Zeus and the Minoans essentially overthrow the Egyptians in Crete, and they kick out the Philistines, and that's when the Philistines start making a comeback to southern Judah and taking back their cities of Ashkelon and Gaza and stuff like that. And then you have the Danites, who, remember, Samson wipes out the 5 lords of the Philistines, and the Philistines never really make a comeback. Well, no, I take that back, because they do have Goliath in the days of David and all that. So apparently they're still there. They're weakened, but it takes them hundreds of years to get their power base back. Okay, and so you have the Danites who are raiding around this area, and then all of a sudden you have the Minoan civilization fall. You have the Hittite civilization fall, and then you have the whole world go into a civilization collapse. And the reason is because the Ammonites are no longer ruling over Mesopotamia. The Assyrians are starting to rise to power, but they're way over in the mountains. The Hittites are collapsing because of the sea peoples and because their armies being defeated by Joshua. The Egyptians have fallen to Moses, and now the Minoan civilization, which had filled that power vacuum, is falling to the sea peoples, which I believe are led by the Danites. Okay, and then those sea peoples are going to settle here in Peloponnese, which is almost an island. You see this little tiny bridge there's Corinth, which is at the head of that bridge. And that is basically, the Spartans are going to be a leading people. And this Aegean League is basically, I think, is an island of all the people who had been in the sea people before. And now they're all colonizing this island because they understand it juts out into the Aegean. If you're holding Crete and the Aegean and all this stuff, then you basically are controlling the flow of sea trade from the west to here. Because people aren't just sailing the open seas, they're sailing down around or up around. And you're going to go up around because there's way more cities and stuff you can trade with there. Down in the south, you have, remember, Carthage is not going to be populated for some time. You have Put, which is going to be west of Egypt. But because of the desertification, it's constantly pushing people south. There's not a really good reason to remain up on the seacoast because you're surrounded by desert. Nothing grows there, so you're going to keep going south, and that's where all your West African peoples are going to basically be descended from. Your East African peoples are going to be descended from Cush. Your West African are going to be from Put. And then obviously Mizraim is going to be Egypt, and they have a great water source, so they're going to stay there. Okay? And basically, most of your sea travel that is going to go from the west is going to be run by the Javan sons. Javan has 4 sons. And if you go to the days of Clement, he's talking about how there's 4 languages among the Greeks, and then there's the common language, which is Koine Greek, which basically is like a conglomerate language of all of them put together. Okay, and Javan has 4 sons, and those 4 sons are going to be the original populators of these islands down here. And then they're going to go, Tarshish is going to go west. And Tarshish is going to found a colony on the west coast of Spain, which is where Jonah tries to get to. And Tarshish is also going to colonize England, which is where tin comes from. And it looks like the Danites basically followed the sea trade. And basically the idea is the people of Tarshish they're gonna have to get here. Okay? On their way there. And all they have to do, they don't have to conquer the Tarshishites, they just have to buy all their tin. So when the Tarshishites get there, if they're giving them a better price on their tin than they would get from sailing all the way up to their other Greek cousins, or to, as far west as, Tyre, for instance, then they're just going to sell it all here. Well, we'll just sell it all here. Yeah, just sell it to us. We'll sell it to the Greeks and all them, and we're going to mark it up. Okay? And so they're going to do that, and they're going to control, because of controlling tin here, and then in Cyprus they're controlling the copper that comes out of Cyprus and the tin that comes from Tarshish. All you need to do is control those 2 islands in Crete, and you basically are controlling the production of bronze. And that's when you had like the Bronze Age civilization collapse, because bronze would have been widespread before that, and now it's consolidated to the people who control it. Okay? And so you have the Bronze Age collapse because bronze is not common. They make a lot of weapons and armor out of bronze. It's I forget what the advantages and disadvantages. I know iron is tougher, but I think bronze is easier to make stuff out of. And so the iron stuff is going to be difficult. And so you find the Philistines having iron weapons, and they don't let the Judahites have iron weapons because it takes a lot of effort to forge it, apparently. And the Judahites are mostly up in the mountains, and my guess is probably that the Philistines have access to what it takes to forge it, and they're keeping the Judahites from having those materials. Okay, and up in the north, these guys are controlling the trade of bronze, and so the Judahites are kind of in that day, in the days of before David, they're having a hard time getting metal, and that's because these guys are controlling it all. And then you find the Greeks getting their metal because they're right here and they're buying it off the Aegean League. And what you have here is then you have these guys from the Aegean League go and sack Troy, which is, I believe, north here. And they're going to sack Troy, who's going to be their main sea rival between here and Phoenicia, which is the Sidonians. And so they sack Troy, and after that you have the city of Tyre start to pop up and be prominent. And then you're going to find the Danites marrying in with Tyre, and eventually this king Hiram is going to send a Danite to help build Solomon's temple. And apparently they're also going to get 30,000 Egyptians to help them, and who knows temples and crap better than the Egyptians. So what you're going to have is you're going to have all this geometric, numerological, mathematical mystery knowledge come into the Danites from the Egyptians, because the foreman for the temple is a Danite named Hiram Abiff. Okay? Hiram Abiff is the patron saint of the Freemasons. And the Freemasons are all about geometry and mystical Pythagorean numerology and stuff like that. Okay? And symbols. And what you have then is you have Hiram Abiff help basically Solomon build his temple with the help of these 30,000 Egyptian workers. And he's going to apparently pick up Egyptian mystery stuff from this. And you have them mixing with Tyre and the king of Tyre under King Hiram, because King Hiram's the one who sends them. Okay? Well, like 3 generations after that, you have the priesthood of Baal murder Hiram's descendants. Okay, and Hiram's descendants basically get replaced by the family that Jezebel comes from. Well, remember, the Danites had been mixing with them the whole time. And then what happens is a grandniece of Jezebel goes and founds the city of Carthage, which Carthage is in what's in modern times called Tunisia. So this is the Carthaginian Empire right here. And where you see Carthage, remember how Tarshish was in Spain, and that's where they would have the access to tin? Well, the Carthaginian Empire is going to take what's now Sicily. This is Sicily, I believe. And I forget what this island's called. It's just not on my radar. Sardini. And then the Etruscans, remember the Etruscans are supposed to be remnants of the Trojans. They probably see the Thracians are Trojans, and Troy was right here. And the Etruscans are Trojans or Thracians, same the descendants of Tyrus. And then the Celtics are basically moving all along here and raiding over here. And Carthage is right here. And Carthage is a Phoenician city-state that becomes an empire, and it comes to run all this, okay? Well, the Danites are already up here among the Lacedaemonians, and there are records that show that the Danites took over what's called Jutland and called it Denmark, okay? Danemark. And then the Tuatha De Danann go up to here, which is Ireland, and the Tuatha De Danann are the predecessors of the Druids, okay? And then there's another, this guy showed me a Dutch map, which is the lowlands of here, and they say that the Tuatha De Danann are up here, because it literally means tribe of Dan in a mixture of Gaelic, which is the Celtic language, and then De, to the Celtics mean, that's the word for gods, but to the Latins, which is the Trojan language, remember you have Thracian, Etruscan, the Latin language, which I don't know what the origin of the Latin language is, De means of, and it literally it means tribe of Dan, okay? Tribe of Dana, okay? Duana or whatever. And well, anyways, the Carthaginians, this area up here is going to be where Pythagoras starts. And then this island off the coast here where Paul lands is Melita, and that's where Thales of Miletus starts the first philosophical schools. And Thales has 2 disciples, Anaxagoras and Anaximander. And those are going to be the founders of the philosophical schools. And then you're going to have Pythagoras is going to be the founder of the Greek mystery schools, because Pythagoras was a cult leader who got his stuff from Egypt, okay? And according to these guys, this is Clement of Alexandria, Thales of Miletus was a Phoenician, and so was Pythagoras. They say he's either a Syrian or a Tyrian. So he's either, Tyre would be a Tyrian, Syrian would be this area right here, okay? But they came from here, and they say that Pythagoras went and studied under the Magi. This is within 50 to 100 years of Daniel being the head of the Magi. He's studying under the Magi. He studied under the Egyptian priests and their mystery cults. And then he's going to study under the Babylonian mysteries as well. And so he apparently did all this here, and then comes to Sicily, I think it is, and he gets chased out of Sicily, and he starts another colony up in Rome, and eventually him and his disciples get burned to death. But all of this stuff, this Pythagorean stuff, is going to get into the Greek philosophy. It's going to mix with Thales of Miletus, and theirs is basically natural philosophy, which is speculating on what the universe is made out of and all that stuff. And it's going to be mixed with the Pythagorean triadism, which is going to basically be their mystery cult that is based on the Egyptian mysteries, and the triad and the triangle and the pyramid are all related. And then you're going to have that mix with the other Greeks over here, because those schools are eventually going to be the predecessors to all the Greek schools. And these guys under Thales of Miletus are eventually going to influence Parmenides, Heraclitus, which is over here in Ephesus, and Socrates, Parmenides, Zeno, There's two Zenos. There's one who Parmenides is buggering, and then there's another Zeno who knows Plato. And these are going to be basically students of Socrates, that one of them forms Stoicism and one of them forms Platonism. And Plato's school is called the Academy. And then the Stoic school is called the Porch. So you're going to hear these early church writers talk about the Porch and the Academy in kind of like a scoffing kind of way, because these people in the Porch and the Academy would sit there and speculate and debate over nonsense stuff, they thought, okay? And what these guys are going to do then is they're mixing in the Pythagorean stuff, which, like I said, I believe it totally comes from the Danites, mixing the Hebrew stuff with Solomon's temple stuff, with Mosaic legend stuff, because they're basically taking the stories from Genesis and Judges and they're just transmorphing them and turning them into the Greek legends. And then what I believe that happened with Samson is in that 20 years between Samson having his first wife burned, and then he basically, the next story you have there, this is how the Samson story goes. You have Samson being born up here, chilling in these two camps, and then God stirs him up to, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to marry anybody from Israel. He is into Philistine women, and you have him involved with 3 Philistine women, okay? Now remember, the Philistines are Egyptians, okay? And they sail the Mediterranean. And Samson's banging their women, okay? So the first one is here, and her father gets burned alive. The next story you have of Samson, and it doesn't say how long after it is, okay? You have Samson showing up in Ashkelon, which is down here, and then he, they try to capture him in Ashkelon because they know who he is. He's famous from here to here, okay? And they capture him, and he carries the gates all the way up to Hebron, and he's back in, where's Hebron? Hebron is up here, okay? So he says he carries the gate back to the hilltop of Hebron, and then after that he apparently goes back to his hometown, and then he falls in love with, in the valley of Sorek, which is near where his first wife was, he falls in love with Delilah there, okay? And then the Philistines go to Delilah and bribe her with a big pile of silver to betray Samson, okay? So what you have here is, I believe that second story of Ashkelon is 20 years later. And all this stuff, it says he judges Israel for 20 years, but it doesn't say anything about what he's doing during that time, okay? He's just, these judges are just these heroes that God raises up to deliver them from their enemies, but it doesn't say what they do. Now, we know God stirs them up against the Philistines here, and then that leads him to start this quarrel with the Philistines here when they try to trap him when he bangs a prostitute here, and then he goes back up to Hebron, and that's when he's back in the Israel camp. And then he goes back home and he falls in love with Delilah, and that's, again, he's back with Philistine women again, and that's when the Philistines bribe Delilah to betray him, okay? So you have a 20-year gap, I believe, between those stories that you have. Well, how did he show up in Ashkelon? Well, Ashkelon is a port city. It's always been a port city. And remember, let's get into the sea peoples here. These are the sea peoples, okay? Now check this out. The sea peoples, these were people who were defeated by Ramses III, and he captures a bunch of them, and he draws pictures of what they look like, and then he names them, okay? And these are the people, he says. The Peliset, that's the Philistines. Tejeker, there's different theories on who these people are. The Denyen, the Weshesh, the Shekelesh, okay? Now notice these same people. Philistines, Tyre, Ashkelon, Dan, and Asher. That's who I think these are, okay? Now, here's the different theories. You can get this on Wikipedia on who these sea peoples were, but the Denyen, that they believe are the same as the Greek Danans, okay? And what you have is Hercules coming to the Argives is the beginning of the Danans in the Greek, among the Greeks. And of course, there's theories that's the Israelite tribe of Dan. It totally is the Israelite tribe of Dan, okay? And then you have these different people. The Ekwesh, they think are the Achaeans. The Luca, they think are the Lycians. These are all the different sea peoples that were involved with raiding and stuff like that at that time. But they really are basically all the seafaring peoples, okay? The Pelisat are the Philistines, and so if you have seafaring people, you're going to have people who are going to join in these raids, but the main ones are going to be those 5 who are on the coastlines. The Weshesh, they think that's another name for the Achaeans. Of course, the tribe of Asher, I think, is who they are. Tejeker, they think is Thrace, or the Thracians, but I think that's the Tyre. You have Teresh is one of them, and Tejeker. That would be Tyrus, Tarshish, Troy, Taurus. That's going to be the Trojans or Tyre. You have Sheridan, which is the Sardinians, and those are going to be on the coast of Turkey, I believe. Shekelesh, people say that that's Sicily. I don't know if that's the Sicilians. Maybe it is. The Sicils were an Indo-European tribe who inhabited Sicily, so Shekelesh could be the Sicilians, or they could be Ashkelon. I don't see Ashkelon on this list, so they might just count Ashkelon with the Philistines, and Shekelesh could be Sicily, but that sounds a lot like Ashkelon, okay? And then, obviously, look at who the leader is, the Denyen, okay? Now, check this out. Here's the pictures of the people. This mushroom haircut, look at hook nose, beard, mushroom haircut. That was literally the Hebrew style, okay? There's your Denyen. There's your Danites, okay? And you have these other people with horns on their head. That's the Philistine hairstyle, or that's their helmets, what they look like, and it's all throughout the Bible. And then you have all these different peoples here. Now, I don't know who all these different peoples here, but those are freaking Danites. That's the Denyen, okay? They're the Danites, and apparently they're the same people as the Greek Danans, and they populate Greece. But what you have is, remember, during the same era, this is really, this Gaza Strip, that's the Palestinians, that's where the Philistine name comes from now. But Ashkelon was a port city. So you have Samson tearing up a bunch of Philistines. Let's see, he goes and kills, I think he goes to Ashdod. Oh, I'm sorry, no. Samson goes to Ashkelon. That's where he kills 30 men to get the coats that he needs for his to pay off his riddle. Okay. So then he does that, and then they burn his people with fire, and he goes and burns their fields. Okay. So he's burnt their fields. He's killed 30 Philistines, and then when they try to kidnap Samson, he kills 1,000 men with a jawbone of a donkey. Okay. Samson's a beast. I'm sorry, and it's in Gaza where he hooks up with a harlot later on. So let's see where Gaza is. Gaza's even further south, okay? Gaza's a port city. So what is Samson doing? Now remember, Samson is from... Samson's from up here. Gaza is way down here, and he just gets done having basically a private war with the northern Philistines. What's he doing way down here with the southern Philistines now? How did he get there? And it doesn't say. He just starts up here in the northern Philistine territory, and he ends up down here in the southern Philistine territory, hooking up with a prostitute. And the way I think he got there is by sea. Because he's not just going to be like, oh yeah, I just killed 1,000 Philistines and murdered 30 dudes in Ashkelon and burned all their fields with fire up here. Now I'm going to go travel through there to get to Ashkelon so I can go sleep with a hooker. He's not going to do that, right? He's going to be very well known all the way down there, okay? So Hercules is known among the Greeks as a man. This is in Clement, okay? And he's getting this from the Library of Alexandria, okay? Clement is saying that Hercules is known for being a man with long dark hair, brown skin, and a hooked nose. Okay? Now, here's your sea peoples. Does that look like dark hair and a hooked nose? Yes. Okay? And he looks like that with a bunch of long hair. Okay? I think Hercules is actual Samson. And I think in the 20 years that Samson had before he comes back to Ashkelon, because remember, the book of Judges... Remember, the Danites didn't write anything down, okay? But the Danites are supposedly well, this is my theory, is that the Phoenician alphabet, like the Phoenicians get their alphabet from the Hebrews, and then they change it and they modify the style of it, and that alphabet becomes the Greco-Roman alphabet. Okay, because they transfer it there, but the Danites are with them the whole time, and I think the Danites are how the Hebrew alphabet gets to the Phoenician. But it looks like the Danites themselves don't write anything down. So the Book of Judges ultimately seems to be compiled by Samuel, because he's the last judge. Okay, but these stories, these legends, seem to circulate largely around the Danites. Okay. So anyways, you have 20 years where Samson is unaccounted for. And I think in those 20 years, Samson sails away. Remember, he's a beast. First of all, he's a beast. The Jews don't want him around. The Philistines want to kill him dead. He is a super beast. And he is not feeling he's not feeling Hebrew women. He sleeps around. And you have 20 years where he's not accounted for. And so what I think happened is I think he hooked up with the Danites who were sailing, and I think he goes around and he starts just killing and marauding and sleeping around. I think that's what Samson does. And what you end up having is you have all of these people who are descended from Hercules. Now, supposedly, Hercules is supposed to be, I think, a descendant of Zeus. And so he's supposed to be half god. So my theory is that he's involved in the Minoan downfall, whatever happens there. And maybe the Minoans join with him and league with him. I don't know, okay? But I know Zeus is the king of Crete, okay? And then they have... Hercules is supposedly a son who's like half god, half human, okay? And then you have the Spartans say that they're descended from King Danon, and they said he ruled over the Argives, okay? And the Argos are right here. The Spartans are right here, okay? So they're saying that Hercules ruled over the Argos, and King Danos is a descendant of his who rules over the Spartans, okay? Well, if he is Samson the Danite, he's going to name one of his descendants after the Danites, okay? And then it says he has sons, and descended from Hercules are guys like Perseus and Achilles. And Achilles is going to be involved in the sack of Troy, okay? And then Menelaus is a descendant of Hercules, who's the head of Sparta. And he is going to be, he's the king of Sparta. He is going to sack Troy and visit the king of Tyre around the time that Hiram Abiff, the Danite, is building the Temple of Solomon, okay? And so, if my theory is correct that these are actual descendants of Samson, when he was just like out fighting and banging, what you're going to have is like these people are going to have stuff that has to do with Samson. And it happens to be that the Spartans, according to Herodotus, were known for going out on they were known for having long hair. And they were known for having long locks of hair that they would go out and see. This is not what the Spartans look like, okay? The Spartans were super gay, and they looked a little bit more like that. I'm just kidding. No, the Spartans had long, this would be your Spartan long hair, okay? They had long hair, and they would go out on the battlefield, and they would comb their long hair before battle. And so when you see these hair dresses or these helmets that had long hair on them, that seems to all be a throwback to Samson, whose power was in his long hair. And these guys would go comb their long hair on the battlefield before they'd fight. And it seems to be like they're all based on Samson. They're the descendants of Samson, okay? And that's why they send a letter to the priests of Judah telling them that they're brethren. And then what's ours is yours, and we're on your side, and you're on our side, okay? Now, this is so important when you get to the future, because the Danites, because they blend in with the Sidonians and leave Israel, they're no longer considered Jews. They're considered Gentiles, okay? And what you would have is, one of the ways they blend in and disappear is they don't circumcise, okay? And so what you do is, remember, God said if your descendants don't circumcise, they're cut off from Israel. So one is, he said, don't marry in with the Canaanites, which they did. And two is, if you don't circumcise, you're cut off from Israel, okay? Well, the Danites aren't doing this. They're disappearing among the Sidonians, marrying in, not circumcising, and all of a sudden it looks like all the gayness of the Greeks come from the Danites. They turn into these wicked people who start out raiding and pillaging, and then they turn into a man's army, and then they turn into a man's army, if you feel me. And then they basically spread homosexuality and pedophilia to the Greeks. That seems to be what happens. But they also spread the Egyptian mysteries and the Phoenician stuff, the Phoenician occultic stuff and the Egyptian mysteries, and apparently they become the Druids, and I believe they become the Freemasons in time, okay? Obviously these guys didn't write anything down, so we can only conjecture this, but it seems like that's what they are, okay? Now that's a lot of roundabout stuff to get us back to these guys. Why? Because when you trace the philosophical terms that they're using, and I mean the divine nous, that's what they call God. They literally call God the Father of the mind, okay? And they call Jesus the Son of nous, or the Son of mind, okay? They're renaming God. This is what they're doing. These are the Orthodox, okay? These are the Roman Catholic predecessors. These are the Orthodox predecessors, okay? And they're going to merge together under Constantine to form Greco-Roman Catholicism, or Catholic Orthodoxy, and then they're going to split in the Great Schism to form the Catholic and Orthodox Church, and then obviously the Reformers are going to dip back into the Greek philosophy, specifically under Augustine, to form the Reformed Catholic Church, okay? But they're all claiming to be the Catholic Church. They're claiming to be the Orthodox Catholic Church on the basis of Orthodox doctrine in the original Old Tradition. They're claiming to be the Roman Catholic Church on the basis of apostolic succession, which is another major thing that's going to pop up. And then the Reformers are going to basically claim to be the true Roman Catholic Church on the basis of Augustinian Christianity, which was really dominant under certain councils. And what they look at is like the actual correct logical outworking of, kind of the combination of Orthodoxy and Catholicism, okay? But they're really just the three loaves of meal who are all leavened, okay? So they're all rooted in this Greek philosophy, and when you get down to what they are quoting, what they're calling God, they're going to call him the divine nous, they're going to call him the logos power, they're going to call him the monad, they're going to call him the archon, the first principle, and then they're going to basically and then Clement is going to say that Apollo, who is Apollyon, the Antichrist, okay, is basically the Greek term for the one God. He's going to claim that that's what it means in Greek, even though it doesn't. It actually means the python. The Bible tells you Apollyon means the destroyer, okay? But he's going to claim, Clement, his writings are jacked up. He's going to have tons of stuff. I'm reading his Stromata right now, and I'm through the first book, and there's tons of different genealogical records. There's tons of different timelines that don't make sense. There's tons of scripture taken out of context, and then there's tons of just bad etymology in them. And one of the things he says is that Apollos means the one God, even though the book of Revelation says Apollyon, which is another name for Apollos, means the destroyer, okay? And the Greeks, Apollos means the python. Pythos is, Pythos means Apollo, so the serpent, okay? So he's going to say that the Greeks, he's going to say very loud and clear that the Greeks were divinely inspired. He's going to say they got stuff mixed up and corrupted, but where Justin Martyr is going to say they had the spermatic word, which is the original divine spark, basically, which is you're going to have that in Hinduism, all this stuff. This is the New Age idea that you were always part God from the beginning, okay? And there's a certain truth to that because God says all souls are mine, okay? Because your soul did come from the Holy Spirit breathing life into you. But they're going to argue then on that basis that you have knowledge of the divine intrinsically and that you are divine intrinsically, and that is going to come to replace the idea of you needing to be born again with the idea of you needing to become wise and self-actualize and ascend to divinity, okay? And Clement is going to say this in no uncertain terms. Origen is going to say this in no uncertain terms. And what they're eventually going to come up with is they're going to merge Stoicism, which is based on a materialist philosophy. They're going to say that's our moral paradigm. And then they're going to merge Neoplatonism. So it's these guys right here. And they're going to merge the Neoplatonic idea of there being ideal and material, that there's an ideal self, which is your self-actualized non-material self, which is you becoming a god. And then your material self is your prison from the fall. And what they're going to get from, I forget, it's either Theophilus of Antioch or Tatian of Syria, is this idea that one of these guys says that paradise, or the Garden of Eden, was originally suspended in a place between heaven and earth. Now, I want you guys to understand the rationalization for this. You have these 4 rivers that are mentioned in Moses that don't make any sense to say that these are coming, they all came from the same fountainhead, because literally one of them is the Nile, and they know that because it says it traverses around Ethiopia or Kush, but they don't realize is there's another Kush, which is the Himalayas, and then there's the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then there's the Pison and Gihon, okay? Well, they're going to say this, and they're going to say that these are all came from Eden. Well, how can they all come from Eden if they're spread all over on these different continents? And the answer that they're going to have is because Eden is basically a place that's between heaven and earth, this suspended kind of pseudo-heaven. And it's basically these rivers that are really flowing down from these mountains, and the glacial ice on the mountains are actually flowing down from one common source that's suspended above the earth, and that's why these rivers are here. Now, these rivers that we have today could have been renamed after the flood, and Moses is just writing down the name of the rivers in Eden before the flood, and then those rivers were renamed after those rivers that were in the pre-flood era. We don't know this, okay? Or the continents could have all been smushed together and they split apart. We don't know that either, okay? We don't know. We just know what Moses names the 4 rivers, okay? But he does make it clear that one of these rivers in the book of Genesis is the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then another one goes through Egypt, or encompasses the land of Kush, okay? And so it sounds like that's either the Hindu Kush or that is the Nile. We don't know, okay? Or there could have been a land of Kush that was there that, remember we have Kish, who is Kush, who was once in Mesopotamia, which is part of the Tigris and Euphrates basin, okay? So there could have been a Kush that was there all along, and there could have been a river that was there. The Pison and Gihon could have all been in the Middle East at one point in time. We don't know. But the point is these church fathers are going to speculate that the original Garden of Eden was neither in heaven or earth. We were basically like angelical beings of light, and that we fell. And that's why you have all these myths about us falling from paradise and falling from grace and falling from God, is because these guys are saying there was an actual place between heaven and earth that we fell from, okay? And he's going to say that in our fall, we got human bodies, okay? So we were actually in a higher place and we fell, and that's where we got flesh bodies from, in our fall. And they're going to say that we need to self-actualize through wisdom to escape our bodies, and that is going to be basically our salvation. We return to our original ideal angelic state, okay? And that's where the term ideal comes from, an ideology, an idealism, okay? It's all about making utopia on earth, or making us ascend to godhood, okay, to our ideal self, okay? Even the word idea comes from Platonic philosophy. It doesn't come from it's not the normal word for the things in your head. The things in your head the Bible would call imaginations. Okay, the things you think on in your head, you imagine, okay, or you advise yourself, or you consult yourself. An idea is something that originates from within you, because they believe that you have an original ideal self that has this innate knowledge in it, and ideas are inspired by that. And so they don't believe you're inspired by God or demonically inspired. They think you could be, but they think there's another source of knowledge, which is your ideal self kind of remembering ideas from when you were a god. Okay? So Clement is going to put this forward because he is trying to baptize all the Greek philosophies, because this guy he was raised in paganism. He knows the Egyptian mysteries. He's big on Pythagoras. He's big on Plato. He's big on Aristotle. He's big on Stoicism. His teacher, so you have Justin Martyr, who is speaking favorably about Stoicism. He's saying people have a spermatic word in them, which is basically the idea of having an innate divine knowledge in them from the beginning. You have Tatian, who is basically going to call God the Logos power. You have Theophilus of Antioch, who is, maybe that's Tatian, that's Theophilus of Antioch, I think. He is going to start, I think he's the one who comes up with the idea of paradise being between heaven and earth. You have Athenagoras, who is going to start merging Platonic thought into it. And then Athenagoras there is rumored to have taught in this school in Athens as well. And then you're going to have this guy named Pantanaeus, who is a Stoic, who becomes a Christian, and he goes and evangelizes in India for a while. And his Stoic background is actually pretty handy in India, because Indian Brahmanism is not that far away from Stoicism. Stoicism has reincarnation in it. They have people becoming part of the Logos and then not becoming part of the Logos, and that's what Brahmanism taught. Okay, and so what he is doing is he's drawing them with a mixture of Christianity and Stoicism towards a better understanding of Christianity, and he's successful out in India apparently. And he comes back on that basis of now being a pretty renowned evangelist, and he is the first official head of this school in Alexandria, and then he disciples Clement of Alexandria. And Clement of Alexandria is basically going to officially, systematically merge Greek philosophy with Christianity and say it was divinely inspired. He's going to say the Sibylline oracles were divinely inspired. He's going to say you can read his first book of Stromata, and I think the first book I read was probably about 50, 60 pages. Okay, there's 8 books I got to read, but like the first book, he's very clearly pushing back against other Christians who he just calls people who are prone to negativity or whatever. Like they're prone to fault finding. He's saying are basically telling him like, this Greek philosophy is not going to make Christianity better. And he's telling them, yes, it will. Because these people have partially divine inspired teachings. And those teachings, when we put them all together with what we know from Christianity and add these teachings to it based on basically judging these teachings, we can make Christianity better, and not only better sell it to the Greeks, but better understand it systematically. And what he does is he starts coming up with a Christianity that is not blending Christianity with Greek stuff, it's subordinating Christianity to Greek stuff, because he is determining on his own basis, he's making himself be the judge between Christianity and Greek philosophy and saying, okay, that's in, okay, that's in, okay, that's divinely inspired. He's making himself the judge of that. And he's doing this on the basis of a belief of an innate, divinely inspired inner self that just knows. Okay? So when you have people who fall for stuff that they believe and they're like, oh, I just felt it in my spirit, I just know. That is not discernment. Discernment means judgment on the basis of what you know. It doesn't mean I just feel it and therefore I know. Oh, it just resonates with me and therefore I know. That is how you get deceived, and that's how people get deceived all the time. I guarantee you, every sin that I've walked into since I was a Christian, I felt like I knew what I was doing. Every time. Every false doctrine I've ever subscribed to, even for a minute, as a Christian, I felt like it made sense to me. Okay? What I didn't do is judge it by what the apostolic teaching says. And that's what these people are doing. They're basically saying, you have the Bible in one hand, and you have philosophy in the other, and I decide between the two things what the truth is. Okay? Do you know who did that? Eve. This is the introduction to my book. That's what Eve did. Satan said one thing, okay? The python, the serpent, says one thing, okay? The Bible says, God's word says another thing, and Eve says, I'm going to decide between myself which one of those things is true. And she decides to eat the fruit of knowledge, okay? So what are these guys doing? They're taking the Pythagorean-based Greek philosophy from the assembly of the Python, and then they're taking the Word of God, on the other hand, and deciding between themselves which one is true. And what do? They eat the fruit of gnosis, knowledge. Gnosis just means knowledge, okay? And he literally flat out says the ideal person is a Gnostic. The ideal person is the person who sorts through the philosophy and sorts out the good, chew on the meat, spit out the bones, and then merges that in with their Christian understanding to build their wisdom towards accentuating or activating and towards self-actualization and towards becoming your true ideal self and escaping this material world. And on that basis, he comes up with, now remember, Ignatius of Antioch is coming up with the theological dominionism, and he is coming up with philosophical amillennialism. And the reason for this, which Origen is going to say flat out in his first principles, is that the ideal, when we come to heaven in the resurrection, we're not going to be eating and drinking. And in the millennium, it talks about eating, drinking, and procreating. And there's no way Jesus is going to come back to have us eating and drinking and procreating. The whole point of this whole thing is to get away from this material world and become immaterial spirit beings like we were. Well, there's a half-truth in that because we do become like the angels. There's a half-truth in him saying we become like gods because the angels are called gods, okay? But the other side of it, where he's all messed up, is the idea that we never come back to eating and drinking, because what he never mentions and he never deals with, and Origen never deals with, is that Jesus was resurrected and then came back and ate food in front of him on purpose. And so these guys think basically that the resurrection, the regeneration of the earth and of heaven is putting it into an ideal state, and that ideal state is all about contemplation, thoughts, and ideas, and not about eating and drinking and material desire. That's what their belief is. And so on that basis, they basically destroy the millennium, and they say the millennium is a Jewish myth, and the Jews were all about material things, and that's why they didn't get that the kingdom is now in spirit, and the Jews thought the kingdom was coming materially, and that's why they rejected Christ. And so that's where your anti-Semitism is going to start showing up. You don't really have anti-Semitism in these guys. What you have is starting with, what's his name? Methodist to Diogenes, which is going to be in the Church Fathers. Methodist is going to basically say how the Jews, with their version of the law, and are just like the Greeks practicing superstition and idolatry. Because he's writing to Gentiles. He's actually writing to, I think, Emperor Trajan or Emperor Decius, one of these two, or Domitian maybe, basically trying to get him to stop persecuting Christians. And he's saying that the Christians don't follow superstitions, they're more logical, and how the Jews followed superstitions like idols, just like the Greeks follow idols, and he's trying to get them to stop persecuting Christians on that basis. What he's not acknowledging is that what the Jews follow, they were ordained to follow by God until Christ came. And they're going away from that and basically saying that the Jews just didn't understand the deeper Gnostic meaning of these things, which Jesus came to show us. Okay, and that's not true. Jesus came to teach these things. These things were metaphors, but they are prophecies that were fulfilled. And so now that the real has come, we don't need the shadow anymore. Okay? That's why we don't have Sabbaths and we don't have food laws anymore. That's why we have arrived to the point where we understand where this was leading to, and it's not a secret knowledge, it's Christ. It's Christ himself. And these guys are saying it leads to secret knowledge, and so they're going back to the secret knowledge of the Egyptians and the Greeks and stuff like that to try to go further in understanding divine things. And out of that, you get what we call theology. Okay? Theology is not a Christian idea. It's an Aristotelian idea that was made up by these Christians who were merging philosophy. And the whole idea of theology, remember, theology is taking your deductive reasoning based on what you believe about God. And you're taking your deductive reasoning and taking it further to come up with further understanding and better ideas. Okay? That's what the Greeks were doing with their speculations about God that came from Thales of Miletus and Pythagoras. Okay? Pythagoras came up with the monad and the triad, which is where the Trinity comes from. And Thales of Miletus comes up with the idea that everything is in God and everything is one God, or everything is one and it's all made of the same substance, and those ideas are going to eventually turn into Parmenides ideas. Okay? And they're saying that we can take that and they're saying we can better understand God by deducting, not just based on Scripture, but by on a combination of Scripture and Greek philosophy, deducting things about God. Okay? To know things that God didn't tell us. Well, that's just another form of secret knowledge. In fact, there's one of the things when they cast the Jews, or when the Jews cast the Canaanites out, and they tell them about all the people that they're not allowed to let live. One of these guys are just called a knower. Okay? So the judges, if you get to Deuteronomy chapter 18, and he talks about all the false prophets and all the different forms of false divination that can come out, and he says a charmer, a consulter with spiritual familiar spirits, or a wizard. A wizard is a philosopher. See, the word wide and wizard, they're rooted in the same word. Okay. Think of Gandalf the wizard, okay? Gandalf is basically, a Nephilim, okay? Now here's what a wizard is. So he says a charmer, and this says shabar, okay? So this says to join, specifically to fascinate, to charm, to couple together, to have fellowship with, to heap up, to join with, and then it says a society. Shabar. Now, I don't know if the original Hebrew is saying it's either this word or this word, but it looks like it's saying to join a society. Both words. A consulter with familiar spirits. Okay, so this is to join a society, to consult with familiar spirits. Okay, so think about the secret societies that people have. They get together and they do little seances to consult demons, right? Or a knowing one, a conjurer, a ghost, a wizard, a knowing one, okay? Yudeoni, okay, properly knowing one, specifically a conjurer, a ghost, or wizard. Yada is a primitive word that means to know, okay? So a wizard is somebody who knows things. They're saying they know things on the basis of some spirit telling them, okay? That's exactly, if you read Parmenides' poem on nature, that's who he is. He's a wizard. He knows something because he's saying a god has told him. Okay? Necromancers get their stuff from the dead. Charmers, basically, it looks like they form secret societies to consult familiar spirits. Wizards have things that they were divinely inspired to know by other gods, spirits, okay? These other people are observers of times. Those are people who observe the weather or the stars to predict the future. Diviners are people who do things with random chance, so like tarot cards, whatever. They cast lots to determine the future. Witches are people who whisper spells, okay? Incantations, so use magic words. And then an enchanter are people who, it also says whisper magic spells, but one of these two actually is uses drugs. Okay, so one of them basically has oracles by using drugs. So that's sorcery, and then the other one is going to use magic words. Okay, so AKA word of faith. Okay, this is magic. It's just magic. Greek philosopher, those are just knowers, because it all started with things that they think were divinely inspired but were not from God, and they're all corruptions of the truth. Okay, and this guy is going to say, yeah, but we're wise now because we have Jesus, and so now we can take all of that paganism and we can filter through it and figure out what the good stuff is, right? Because they were all following some original truth, and they were just counterfeiting it and corrupting it. Okay, that's what these guys are saying. So listen to that and compare it to what Bethel's saying. We can go to witchcraft bazaars and we can learn what they're doing, and we can baptize their witchcraft and say that was based on their corrupting an original divine version, but we're actually learning from the witches how to do spiritual gifts. Okay? That is the basis of all your word of faith stuff. It's magic. All your mind science, Christian science stuff, that is mind over matter Gnosticism. Okay? It's wizardry. That's the basis of all your Bethel, your weird grave soaking, and your Christian tarot cards and your Christian Ouija boards. This is all just using the exact same logic. Now listen to this. The exact same logic that your seminaries use to say that we can baptize the Greek philosophers and use their logic to better understand God, the crazy charismatics are using with witchcraft and saying we can just baptize their magic arts and use them to better know God. They're all saying it. And the answer is no. Those are counterfeits. They were always counterfeits. And if you trace back the logic and the history, all this stuff, for all we know, it could have spread by demons, or it could have spread by the Danites. All of it. It could have come from the original Mosaic stuff. And literally, all your idolatry has a few sources. You have Nimrod in the Tower of Babel, and then you have Canaan, who is in the Bible, and the Book of Jubilees says he's in Luke's genealogy, but he's not in Genesis. And you have this Canaan, who basically rediscovered the false mysteries from the Nephilim from before the flood on a stone near what's now Babylon, and that's he restarted those mysteries, and that's where you get astrology from. Okay, and the Greek or the Jewish extra biblical tradition says that astrology was taught. Astrology, makeup, building weapons, songs, all this stuff were taught to humans by the Nephilim over time, or by the angels that seduced the women to have the Nephilim. Okay, I don't know if that's true. It's in the Book of Enoch, but we do know a lot of the stuff came from the line of Cain, and the Cainites were pretty evil. So. Then we have this stuff getting rediscovered after Noah's flood by Canaan, who's the son of Arphaxad, and that's where the Chaldeans come from. Okay, and the Chaldeans are astrologers. And then you have the Egyptians apparently get their stuff from a guy named Pharaoh who came out of Mesopotamia. And then you have the Danites, who seem to be getting their stuff from mixing Canaanite false religion with Egyptian mysteries with the Bible, and they seem to be spreading that around the Greek world. And after the true Bible and the true priesthood is, the Bible's not published. You do have copies of it among the Samaritans. You do have copies of the individual scriptures among the prophets and the priests, but you don't have a Bible, and your temple's destroyed, so your priestly worship is destroyed. Within 100 years of that, within 100 years of the temple being destroyed, you have Taoism pop up, Confucianism pop up, Buddhism pop up. Brahmanism has already been around for a little while, but you have Zoroastrianism pop up. You have Pythagoreans pop up. You have the Greek philosophical schools pop up. All of that, all the major world's religions all show up out of thin air within 100 years of Judaism dying. And all these philosophies seem to have a common thread in them. Reincarnation, a duality of light and darkness, right? Like a balance, which is basically the Pythagorean duad, all overruled by a God or a universe that's all one. So you have a monad and a duad, okay? You have the same thing in Star Wars. Like, if you go watch Star Wars and you watch the Clone Wars, and you have Anakin Skywalker, and you have Anakin Skywalker, and you have Ahsoka, and you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they go to this planet, and they find these people, and you have this father they're called the Ones, okay, and the father is basically the embodiment of the Force, and he has a son and a daughter who are the embodiment of the light side and the dark side of the Force. And Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka Tano get into this whole episode with this battle with them, and they end up the dark side kills his sister on accident, and then the dark side rules, and then Anakin ends up killing him. And basically what he's telling this guy is that this whole thing is going to play out in the rest of the world, because they're like in this heavenly place wherever they are, and they're saying that this thing is going to play out in the rest of the world, and that's going to be where the light side and the dark side fight, and then Anakin's in the balance in the middle, and of course his son, turning him back to the light side is how he balances out the Force. And basically it's the same thing. It's the monad is one, and then the duad is opposites that are contending, but they're under the guidance of the one, and nothing really ever changes. Okay, so this guy Clement of Alexandria flat out says that the monad is God. Okay, which means, well, who's the duad? Well, in the duad they're going to say is Christ, because that's the spirit and the logos, the word and the spirit. The word and the spirit. And what they do is they make the word and the spirit a duad. Well, what a duad is a contention. And so they create this idea of a contention between the word and the spirit. And what you have come out of it at the same time that Justin Martyr starts doing this, at the exact same time, you have a guy show up called Montanus. And Montanus shows up and says, I am the Paraclete, just like Muhammad's going to do years later, okay? But this is 500 years before Muhammad. He shows up and he says, I am the Paraclete. I'm the one who is going to come and guide you into the next phase of things, because the era of the Father was the Old Testament, and the era of the Son is the New Testament, and this is now the era of the Spirit. And this guy is going to show up, and he is going to start a contention between these guys, these dead philosophers, and these guys, these dead ritualistic priests, and then themselves, which they call the spirituals, the spiritual Christians. They're exactly the same as the Pentecostals and the charismatics. Exactly the same thing. They're basically like, those people are Christians, but they're not spiritual like we are. And what he's going to do is he's going to come in, and people believe that he used to be an oracle of Delphi or an oracle of Cybele, which is like a goddess among the Phrygians. They believe that this guy was a priest, and he would get possessed by demons, and he would go into shaking fits. Does this sound like anyone you know? Like this is what's her name? Heidi Baker. Shaking fits and the whoa. He would do that, okay? And he would show up and he'd be like, these guys don't have the spirit, I have the spirit, and he would act out of control. And this is like literally around 160 AD, okay? This is like, so remember, Polycarp dies, and he's the last connection they have to the apostles, okay? And he's the last guy who doesn't get involved in the priesthood stuff, and all the people following Ignatius are going to get involved in the priesthood stuff. And those are the ordained leaders, and then you have the academic leaders. These guys, a lot of them are not ordained. Theophilus of Antioch is, the rest of them are not, okay? These guys are not ordained. Maybe Clement was a bishop at one point in time, or an elder. And some of these guys are going to be evangelists, and they're going to serve the church in an apologetic function. Justin Martyr obviously is a martyr, but these guys are typically, they're more about the intellectual side of things than they are about the actual ministry. And some of them become ministers, and eventually they're going to blend together and become the Roman Catholic Church, okay? But the Montanus, which is going to be that third stream, is going to pop up around this time, and you're going to have Montanus have two prophetesses that hang out with him, because the false prophet always comes in to seduce the women first, and you're going to have two prophetesses, Priscilla and Maximilla, who take off after him during this exact same era, okay? And then they're going to seduce a lot of Christians away to thinking, okay, you have the intellectual Christians, and then you have the priesthood, which is kind of like, they have their mysteries, but they control everything. Okay, they control everything because Ignatius taught everybody that they need to be silent in the presence of the bishop. So you have no more spiritual gifts, no more prophesying, anything like that among them. And then your third group is going to be your Montanists, and those are going to be your charismatics. Okay, and there's your this is like everything that happens in Protestantism, right? You have your Presbyterians, you have your Baptists, you have your intellectual Reformed people, and then you have your crazy charismatics. Okay. None of them are in balance. They're all, get this, the Montanists are inspired by Gnosticism too. The Montanists are modalists. And Tertullian, I read this in Tertullian is a modalist. They don't tell you this in church history, that Tertullian, the father of Latin Rite Christianity, I found right in his Apology, where he says that God is like the sun and Jesus is like a beam of light. And he's basically a mode of God. He calls it modes, okay? And that's literally where modalism comes from. This is Tertullian. This is the beginning of the 2nd century AD. And Tertullian is also a Montanist. He becomes a Montanist. And he basically starts teaching stuff that the Montanists believe. And then the ironic thing is the Montanists are the only ones who are preaching against infant baptism. And they're the only ones preaching that if you deny Christ under persecution, you're not saved. So this is how the devil's working. He has a true idea wrapped in a lot of falsehood. And then he has a number of true ideas wrapped in a smaller amount of falsehood. And so what happens is the one with the smaller amount of falsehood eventually becomes more reasonable over time. He already did this with the Greek philosophers, okay? That's why Stoicism and Platonism are the main things by his time. What he's really advancing is Pythagoreanism, which is literally the serpent's tongue, but it's in Platonism and it's in Stoicism, which seem a lot more reasonable than Epicureanism, which is all hedonism, and which is Plato is considered a lot more reasonable than the other versions of he's considered the most middle ground synthetic of all the Greek philosophers, and then the Stoics are considered the most moral. Okay, and so Stoicism and Platonism have already won out among the Greeks and the Romans before they win out among the Christians. But the underlying thread in all of it is Pythagoras. And the underlying thread in Montanism is going to be they're going to fall for Sabellianism or modalism. And there's going to be some other stuff, but there's going to be mostly legalism. There's going to be some modalism, and then there's going to be ecstatic prophesying, which is, it's going to be based on the Sibylline oracles and stuff like that. Because they've been taught that the Sibyl was legit, and the Sibyl would shake and do all kinds of weird stuff when she would prophecy. And so when this guy shows up and shaking and doing all kinds of weird stuff as he prophesies, little do you know, this is within 10, 20 years of the Sibyl being legitimized, you have people showing up, acting like the Sibyl, and being received as prophets. Because it's all based on the same threads of the same errors, with the same, Shepherd or Hermas said the Sibyl's legit, and all these guys said the Sibyl's legit. And so if some guy shows up shaking and acting crazy like the Sibyl, well, why do we have any reason to believe that they're legit? And then they show up with false prophecy, okay? And so what ends up happening as all this is going on is like, if you're the priesthood, and you have to choose between the crazy Montanists and the Greek Gnostic intellectuals, where my enemy's enemy is my friend. And so the priesthood starts aligning with these guys. And what happens is Clement is going to have two students. One is going to be Hippolytus of Rome, and the other is going to be Origen. And they're going to go in very different directions, because Hippolytus is going to study under Irenaeus after that. And he's going to realize that this guy's a Gnostic, this is crazy. He's going to be critical of him. And then he's going to realize that the Roman Catholic Church, which is influenced by Epicureanism, is full of adulterers, and he's going to try to, but not only that, the Romans are being way too nice to this Gnostic stuff, and Hippolytus is going to leave the Roman Church over it and try to start a new church. And the only reason he doesn't succeed is because he gets thrown into basically a death camp with the successor of the bishop that he leaves in Rome. And the story that the Romans have is that he reconciled and submitted to the true bishop after that, which is, again, this is the Romans telling you this, who knows, and that he preserved the one true Catholic Church, and that's why he's a saint among the Romans, okay? But the truth is that we don't know. We know that he wanted to split with the Romans because they were way too nice with people who were sinning. They were way too nice with Gnostic philosophy, and he tried to split and purify the church. Okay? He fails, but then Novatius tries after him, because Novatius is saying that these people who deny Christ when they're being persecuted, they are not saved. And so they need to be rebaptized. And that's where the term Anabaptist comes from. And then Cyprian, after Tertullian after that, says, no, we have a special doctrine of the Lapsarians. Essentially, Peter denied Christ and he's all good, so these guys can deny Christ and be all good. Breaking it down pretty simply. I haven't read through Cyprian yet, so I'm probably going to edit and amend how I say that, but for my book. But I mean, that's essentially what's going on. You have, by this time, the Catholics are practicing infant baptism. That's going to start. You first start getting notice of it in Clement or in Origen's day. So these guys are going to basically close out the 2nd century, and it's in the 3rd century where infant baptism starts popping up, and Tertullian is pushing against it. The Montanists are pushing against it. You don't have Hippolytus is for it. He actually writes a catechism, and he's for it. But then Hippolytus lives to see a generation of people who are infant baptized, and how well do they grow up? Well, they deny Christ when they're under persecution. Well, why is that? Well, apparently, like doing the Achilles heel thing on them and dipping them in the river Styx to make them immortal doesn't work. Do you know the story of Achilles? You guys have to learn the story of Achilles. This is infant baptism, okay? So one of the legends that the Greeks picked up from the Egyptian is the legend of the Nile River being basically this place between the living and the dead. Okay, and the Egyptian pharaohs were considered the gods of the dead and the guys who would decide and help you get to the afterlife in the good side. Okay, and basically you have Achilles. The Greeks are going to pick this up, and that's why the Greeks put 2 coins on the eyes of the dead, because that's to pay the boatman to get you across the river Styx. That's their version of the Nile. And in their mythology, you have Achilles. Get this. Achilles is dipped in the river Styx by his mom, and that's how he becomes immortal. But because she holds him by his heel doesn't get baptized. And so he's mortal on his heel. And so that's where his an arrow pierces his heel or something like that, and then that's how he dies. That's where we get Achilles' heel from, okay? Because the Achilles tendon is that's that tendon on the heel, and they call it the Achilles tendon after Achilles, okay? Well, Achilles' mom dunks him underwater to make him immortal as a baby, okay? Where do you think infant baptism comes from, you guys? The Greeks already believe this stupid-ass story, okay? The Greeks are not like... They literally think that the Christians are straightening out all their myths, all their legends, because you have guys like Clement and the other philosophers before him telling them, this is what Clement is saying, is that Plato and these guys before him are commenting on Moses. And they're telling him that all their myths and legends are based in Moses, which there's a partial truth to some of this stuff, but then they're telling him that they can straighten out their myths and legends if they become Christians. They're telling them they can straighten out their philosophy if they become Christians. And so what do you have happen within under 50 years of these guys starting to baptize this Greek philosophy and change the myths and legends and straighten them out according to their supposed divine logos, is you have Christians thinking, or you have, noob Christians, Greek Christians thinking, so if I dunk my baby underwater, they become immortal. Just like the story of Achilles. Well, who wouldn't want a baby that's immortal like Achilles, right? And so they start baptizing their babies. This is how dumb they are, okay? Now, I wasn't even planning on talking about this. This is just where I went. These guys are going to basically legitimize so much Greek philosophy and so much Greek paganism that as long as you Christianize it in style, in form, and ritual, and whatever, it's okay. It's okay. And they call it baptizing this stuff, okay? And so they are going to baptize Plato, and they're going to baptize Achilles being dipped in the river Styx, and they're going to baptize all this stuff. And then eventually you have by Tertullian's day, okay? Tertullian is writing probably around the same time as Clement, but he is writing from Carthage, and he is not as exposed to Clement as like Clement is exposed to Irenaeus, but he's basically refuting Irenaeus. Hippolytus is one of his students, and these guys are essentially like Tertullian is going to be exposed to a lot of their stuff, but they're not exposed to him. Tertullian is basically a Roman lawyer who leaves his law practice, and he starts to write systematic theology essentially for Latin Rite Christianity, and he is making sense out of a lot of the ritualistic habits that are forming. And his stuff is closer to the biblical truth than it is to Roman Catholicism, but it's the basis of Roman Catholicism because he's building on things that Irenaeus said, he's building on things that Ignatius said, and he is building on things that like Justin Martyr said, and he's taking it further in Carthage, okay? And then Cyprian's going to be under him. Then he's going to get influenced by the Gnostics, and then that's going to keep him from getting into some of the Roman Catholic stuff and some of the Gnostic stuff, but not entirely. He's into modalism and stuff like that, okay? These are all your famous early church people. I mean, if you're a Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, again, with the Reformers, they're going to mostly wrap stuff up with Augustine, but they're going to dip into Origen and all these guys too where it suits them, okay? But I mean, this period of time between Justin Martyr and Ignatius and Augustine, which is going to be like 300 years later, they all hang their hats on these guys. All of your seminary-trained clergy and all your seminary-trained professors and teachers hang their hats on these guys. And they won't criticize these guys and tell you what I'm telling you is these guys were essentially mixing Christianity with paganism. This isn't something Constantine just showed up and did all of a sudden. Constantine just rode the wave and saw the political possibilities of adopting this thing like Trump did. Okay, Constantine is literally the earlier incarnation of Trump, okay? And Trump is basically Constantine 2.0. He just sees the potential there, and he goes, hey, if I can get on board with these stupid Christians who are mixing Greek philosophy and Christianity already on their own, I can just mix in the Vestal Virgin cult, which I'm the Pontifex Maximus of, and basically become the de facto head of the church, because I'm just I'm just an objective third party helping you guys decide between disputes, okay? I'm not here to basically try to rule over you and try to be your Pontifex Maximus. I've already got my own cult to run. But I'm here to just listen to you and reason with you. And what do they end up doing? They end up baptizing the Vestal Virgin cult, and the Stoic influence on Christianity leads the Desert Fathers to become monastic, and that's where you're eventually going to have monks and then female monks, which are all celibate, and they live in the desert, and they take oaths of poverty and stuff like that. And those eventually are going to become celibate priests and celibate nuns, which is exactly what the Vestal Virgins were. And they were the people who served Vestia, which was the perpetual virgin mother of the gods. Or I'm sorry, she was Zeus's sister. Okay, she wasn't the mother of the gods, but she was Zeus's sister. She's the Vestal Virgin. She was Hestia, who was the goddess of the hearth and the home, and she was a perpetual virgin. And that was who her high priest was called the Pontifex Maximus. And he had his home in Rome. And Julius Caesar took over that title, and that's how the Caesars became the high priests and the emperors of Rome. And Constantine had that title, and he maintained that title, and all of the emperors after him maintained that title until the emperors fell in 1492 when the Turks conquered Constantinople. And that's when the popes start calling themselves Pontifex Maximus. Okay? It's all just mixing paganism in. So, you guys, how do you stay above this fray intellectually? Okay, one is you go to church. I mean, I went to a Bible study the other day, and I had people like yelling at my earwax to come out in Jesus' name, and like, people are deceived, and there are layers upon layers upon layers of deception. Okay, it's not that I'm like gonna fix it. I'm not gonna go into this Bible study or this church and this thing and like wind it all back to the original thing. I'm not here to do that. You're not here to do that. If you're here listening, you're going, something's up in what I've been taught, and it's crazy, and it's not the truth, and I'm here to confirm to you, you're not crazy. Okay? Keep studying the truth, and where you can get people off their drunk sauce and onto the scripture is no Bible prophecy. Because when these things start happening, and when you start knowing what's going to happen in the future and they don't, that is the sign of a true prophet. And you can pull them back to the true prophets and say, hey, look, I'm telling you what the true prophet said. Now, are you ready to listen? And that's when they listen. That's what I'm holding out for, okay? I'm studying to show myself approved unto God, a faithful workman who rightly divides the word of truth. And that's why my new book that I'm writing right now is called Rightly Dividing, okay? It is taking all of this stuff that I'm teaching you guys and rambling on for hours and hours and hours, and I'm putting it into a concise format, okay? And so this thing is basically, it's saying this is true Christianity. I'm not mincing words about what this is. This is what true Christianity is, and I'm explaining to you guys where all the false Christianity came from. And I'm saying if you want to be one with Christ, it's not just about love and not thinking. It's about word and spirit. It's about love and truth. You have to grab hold of both, okay? Remember, there's two treasures hidden in the field, okay? One's the word and one's the spirit. You can't say you have the spirit, but you're wrong on the word, okay? You can't say, you have the word, but you reject the spirit, okay? You have to have both. And what I'm showing is this is all about bewailing the leaven of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Herodians. This is Jesus' prayer that we all be one. This is how it was in the beginning. Then I'm showing the patristic seminary, patristic judges, and then my chapter 3 I'm working on right now is called the academy and the priesthood. Because the patristic judges is really going to go up to Nicaea, but it's going to split and form two camps, which is going to be the academy, and that's going to be your Orthodox, and the priesthood, and that's going to be your Roman Catholics over time. Okay, they're going to mix and mingle, but that's the essential division. And then the Nicene Compromise is where they come together under the authority of the Pontifex Maximus, and then under Augustine's influence, they're going to become Christendom. And then Christendom is basically going to be where they start using the secular state to attack people who are not quote-unquote Orthodox, and who decides who's Orthodox eventually is going to filter down until you get to the Pope saying, I'm the one who decides. I'm the head of the church. And that's when the Eastern Church is going to break away. But again, by this time, the emperors are weak. They're getting their territories all taken over by the Muslims, while the Franks and the popes have allied to basically conquer Europe, okay? And so after that, you're going to have out of the Franks are going to come the reformers, because the battle of power is between the Franks, which is where the Germans and the French come from, and then the Latins, which is the Italians, which is where the popes come from. And what you're going to have after that is you're going to have a battle between the French and the Germans, because they're two sons of Constantine, over who rules Europe. Okay, one's going to become the Holy Roman Empire, and one's going to become the Kingdom of France. And these two things are going to battle over who rules Europe. And the French are actually going to kidnap the popes, and they're going to set up their own popes. The Germans are going to try to be like the Constantines and basically work hand in hand with the popes. And eventually the German citizens get sick of the Italians running stuff, and they basically rebel against their emperor and against the popes, and that becomes the Lutheran churches, that becomes the Swiss cantons, which are where the Calvinists are going to come from, and that's going to become the Netherlands, which are basically, those all used to be under part of the Holy Roman Empire. And then Spain, which is going to be the part of the Holy Roman Empire that stays Roman Catholic, is going to remain loyal to the popes. And then you're going to have France, which has always remained loyal to the popes. They're going to stay in. And then you're going to have Austria stay in. And then these countries, and then Portugal. And then essentially the popes are going to commission the Spanish and the Portuguese to go colonize and take over the world for Jesus. And that's where dominionism is going to come. And then the Anglicans in the United Kingdom, which is mostly Calvinists and then pseudo-Catholic Henry Tudor and all that, they're going to compete with them to colonize the world with Protestantism. And the Catholics essentially are going to take over Africa, India, and South and Central America. Or I'm sorry, the Catholics are going to, and then the Protestants are going to take over North America. And North America is going to dominate. And then eventually they're going to get in the 7 Years' War, and England is going to take India back from the Portuguese and start the Dutch East India Trading Company, because the Dutch are going to, England's going to go bankrupt, and I think they sell it to the Dutch. And the Dutch East India Trading Company is going to control the tea trade, and the Dutch are also going to basically control the slave trade. Basically they're going to push tea and slaves into America, and that's where the American Revolution is going to come from. Okay, and we'll get into all this later. But in that context, you have the Great Awakening happening. Okay, and then after that, we have what I call popular rebellion, and that's where basically churches start to become whatever any charismatic leader can say they are. And so you're going to have a bunch of churches starting among a bunch of guys who are going to say, "I'm the new thing." And then the shape of things to come is going to cover what happens from here going forward. And that's actually what I got in this video to talk about. So if you guys have another hour to sit here and listen, I wanted to bring you guys to this right here. This is Johnny Harris. This is one of the channels I follow. Johnny Harris is an ex-Mormon, but he actually makes really good history videos. He's going to have a little bit of left-leaning, a little bit secular leaning on his stuff, but he actually does a pretty good job of writing history, and his formatting and his presentation is very good. Okay, well, he has this one coming out called "We're Heading into a New Cold War," and this aligns exactly what I'm telling you about, which is eventually becoming the kings of the East and the Antichrist Empire. This guy doesn't see it because he's an apostate Mormon. But what's going on is this new Cold War that's coming on in the world between China and basically it's a combination of America and Europe on one side, and then on the other side you're going to have China and Africa and all that stuff. China and Africa is going to be, the BRICS nations are becoming the kings of the East, and the West, which is going to eventually consolidate around Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, and Europe. Because America and Russia are going to go down in World War III, they're going to become the Antichrist Empire, and you're going to have a two-world order that's going to replace the American-Russian paradigm, which the American-Russian paradigm, I mean, they say America won the Cold War, but then why is Russia still invading countries and we can't stop them? So the Cold War never ended. But Russia's poor and America's rich, and America's biggest economic rival is China, while their biggest nuclear rival is Russia. And so this is going to end in Russia and America nuking each other, and in the aftermath of that, Turkey, who has its whole country walled off, and China, who is just smart and has their hooks and everything, they're going to arise as the two main powers of the New World Order after that. That's where this is all going, and that's where my book's going to go. And my book is going to tell you how American dominionism, okay, this is going to be American dominionism, which is basically, you have three major sections to this, okay? You have the Presbyterian-led Calvinist dominionism, okay? And you're already seeing that because first they got the Calvinists into the Baptist churches with Calvinism, and now they're spreading infant baptism into them, and now they're spreading amillennial dominionism into them, okay? That's one side. Then you're having the charismatic NAR dominionism, and you're going to see those two things merge together. And with that, you're going to see the American Revolutionary Alex Jones meets Jordan Peterson meets Ben Shapiro meets Ali Stuckey meets all this, this Western mindset, basically dominionism of Christian nationalism. That's what you're going to have. It's going to be Christian nationalism. And Christian nationalism is really the basis for the Reformation. It was all about like going from Christian imperialism to Christian nationalism. And Christian nationalism is basically like, well, we can't make the whole world Christian, but we can make America Christian, and then we can have treaties with the whole world, because in the amillennial mindset, we have forever to accomplish this Christian takeover of the world. We can just do it gradually, over time, but what they're all trying to do is sell Christian virtues, aka Stoicism, on the new conservatism, okay? And you have guys like Andrew Tate, who is a self-professed Stoic and now a Muslim, okay? This idiot, he's an idiot. Okay, he's probably an intelligent guy. His dad was CIA chess, master or whatever. But this guy was like, he's probably a relatively intelligent guy, and he was in kickboxing, but he's an idiot. He's figured out how to basically pimp hoes and make money, and he goes around now talking to people about like conservatism. And it's all about pursuing self-control for the sake of self-promotion, self-excellence in order to get hot women and money. Okay? He's an idiot. And whoever he thinks he is, but here's what's sad about him. He's an absolute moron, but guess who's talking to him? Tucker Carlson's talking to him. Just look up Andrew Tate on YouTube. You'll have Tucker Carlson talking to him. You have this guy, I forget what his name is. Minect PBD podcast, and this guy's a pretty smart and reasonable guy, but they're bringing this idiot on who is just like, he's just like a kickboxer MMA type guy who is just like constantly in drama with media, it's just nonstop chauvinism, nonstop stoicism. Now he's into Islam, telling people they need to convert to Islam, get a Muslim wife. So the Muslims like this guy, okay? And I've been saying for a while, watch the Muslims, because you have the Mormons, you have the charismatics, you have the Calvinists, you have the Ben Shapiro type Jews, you have the agnostics like Jordan Peterson, who look at Christianity as just kind of like a mythology, but it's got some good points to it. You have your New Agers like Russell Brand. You have your crazy revolutionary New Agers like Alex Jones. And then now you have Andrew Tate, who's a Muslim now, and he is hugely influenced. I got a friend who's campaigning for Rick DeSantis, and he's saying that the young people are very much into Andrew Tate, okay? And this is becoming the new conservatism, okay? And here is the spirit and the heart of it, okay? And this fits in perfectly with what this guy is saying about China's new policy, okay? Their policy is, you stay out of my business, I'll stay out of yours. Male domination, male leadership, which I have no problem with male leadership at all, but it's chauvinistic. It definitely denigrates women. But it's all about self-promotion, stoicism, and nationalism. Okay? And this movement is going to work very well with the Chinese, because the Chinese are very stoic. Confucianism and stoicism are very similar. It's about just accepting what is and just keeping your head down and working hard. And whoever's in governmental power, just let them be in governmental power. That's why the Chinese have been able to hold on to the Chinese people with communism so well for so long, is because the Confucian mentality is very much stoic. Okay? And essentially the idea is going to spread is, this is what China is spreading here, is we won't interfere with your Islamic dictatorship. You don't interfere with our communistic dictatorship. We're just trade partners. Okay? There is going to be a brand of Americans that are led by idiots like Andrew Tate and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and all that are going to advocate this kind of thing. And within America, what you're going to see rise is a new form of Nazism. It's going to be V for Vendetta, Nazi style, very orderly, very strict, very rules-based, pseudo-Christian, pseudo-Mormon, pseudo-Islamic, Western conservatism. Okay? That is going to happen because here's why. Your Western cities that are crazy liberal, they're all going to get nuked. New York, San Francisco, Seattle, these places that are like the major port cities of America, but they're also the hotbeds. I mean, most people don't realize from a policy standpoint, people don't realize this. I want you guys to hear this. From a national policy standpoint, I promise you, neither the Democrat nor the Republican leaders want to see our country multiply. If they care about our country at all, if they're not just like, let's let America go down so the New World Order arises in the Middle East, there are those. Then there are the nationalist ones, okay? I promise you, these nationalists, I don't care how liberal or how Democrat they are, they're not trying to multiply homeless people and drug addicts. Okay? They're not. But what they are trying to do is get all those people to gather into the same cities that they know are going to be our most likely nuclear targets. Okay? Pay attention to the map of the most likely nuclear targets. Okay? Now, the reason all these ones out in the Midwest are likely nuclear targets is because that's where nukes are. Okay? But these are our port cities, major port cities, okay? And then run that about where all your crazy, drug addict, homeless, let the homeless do whatever they want, let the criminals do whatever they want, liberals are going, okay? Or where they're letting them take over. And they're the cities they expect to get nuked. And so what's going to happen after the nuclear war happens is you're not going to have these massive voting blocks of drug addicts and homeless people and people who rack up college debt and then never want to get a job, and all these people who have the vote, but they're morons and they're pariahs. They don't add anything to the society. They just take from it, and then they expect you to pay their bills afterwards. Sorry, I lived for free and took 5 vacations on my college loans. Now you pay back my loans. No, and there's a civil war starting in the U.S. between people who are making money and people who are taking money. Okay, that's heading, and what's going to stop the Civil War is going to be World War III. But who's going to win World War III? It's not going to be your homeless junkies or your kids who don't want to pay back their college loans. Okay, they're going to get drafted to go die, or they're going to be in the cities that get nuked. And that's how America is going to become super conservative after that. Super conservative. Because the people who hold their crap together and keep their heads down and are able to endure while a Nazi-fied government takes over and is super oppressive are going to be the people who are conservative. They stick mostly to their family. They stick mostly to the countryside. They stick mostly to their local don't ask too many questions churches. And they're going to basically keep their heads down, and they're going to not be persecuted. And the Christians who are questioning things, the Christians who are talking about end times, the Christians who are saying, hey, we don't like all this misogyny either, the Christians who are saying, hey, we don't like all this Calvinism either, those are going to be the ones that get persecuted. Those are going to be the ones they get rid of, because what they want is unity, conformity, security, and materialism. They're living for this world. And you're going to have a lot of good Christians who just keep their heads down. They're not going to interfere too much. It's not their domain. And then you're going to have the ones that take over being the people who are pushing the Seven Mountains Mandate, people who are pushing theonomy and Christian nationalism. And they are going to join with China in this new era of this new bipolar world, which is basically going to be, let's see if I've got a picture of it here. So this new bipolar world that is emerging, that is being led by China, is going, the America that remains afterward is going to join that, and the parts that don't are probably going to. This is going to be the northeastern block of America are going to join a new form of European Commonwealth, and so you're going to see northeastern Canada, joining with probably a new form of British Commonwealth, which is already linking up with Australia and New Zealand and all those guys. And they're going to be balancing a power against Canada, and then they're going to turn against the Antichrist at the end. Okay, so that's where it's all going to go, and that's essentially what my book is going to get into. This is, again, I probably won't have this published till next year because so much study and research is going into it. I'm here. So I'm like 100 pages in. This is going to be about a 350-page book, and I'm going to try to keep it succinct and simple, but I'm trying to document it very well, which takes time because if I conjecture or speculate something, I need to make it clear that this is a conjecture, this is a speculation. If I have something that is rooted in documented fact, I need to put that forward as being rooted in documented fact because I'm writing this book for the person who's going to seminary and going, what am I missing? Because you go to seminary and they're not going to teach you. I don't care what seminary you go to. There is no seminary that is teaching you biblical eschatology. They're either teaching you, this is it. They are either teaching you dispensational pre-trib rapturism, which is going to fall apart, or they're teaching you partial preterist amillennialism. That's it. Those are your only options when you go to seminary. There is no seminary teaching biblical eschatology because biblical eschatology is historic premillennial mid-tribulational rapture. That's what the Old Testament, or that's what the early church taught. That's what the Bible teaches. That's what the early church taught. And if you get my Revelation book, it's going to explain it to you. It's predicting the future as we speak. So if you guys like to have a little bit of a beat on what's going on, get my book, read it, understand where it's coming from, understand the scriptures it's rooted in, and then if you want to keep up with my channel, I'll tell you a little bit more. I'm not going to sit there with endlessly prognosticating about what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you generally what's going to happen. And as stuff happens, I'm going to say, yep, this is that. And I'm not going to keep predicting new things. I'm just going to keep showing you where the things that are happening are lining up with what I've already said. Okay? But this is talking about how it got that way. And again, if you see where it's come from, you have a better idea of where it's going. So hopefully this book will be out by next year, and I'll let you guys know. I'll have like a launch for it. So anyways, hope you guys are blessed by that. I know that's super long. I've been probably talking for 3 hours straight, but I hope you're blessed by that, and you have a great rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.